Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us at this regular meeting of the Madera City Council. If I can have the call of the roll, please. Here.
Here. Let's try again. I'm sorry, my mic was not on. Mayor Pro Tem Cece Foley Gallegos.
Here.
Councilmember Jose Rodriguez.
Here.
Councilmember Donald Hawley.
Present.
Councilmember Derek Robinson.
Present.
Councilmember Will Oliver.
Here.
And Councilmember Charles Rigby.
Here.
Thank you so very much, Sonia. And I believe, do we have Pastor Joyce Lane with us from Zion? There she is. My good friend, Pastor Joyce, will lead us in the invocation. If everybody would stand, please.
Good evening. Our prayer will, and bear with me, I've been in the dentist's office all morning. Yes. But our prayer will be coming from Habakkuk 3:17 and 18. Though the fig tree may not blossom, nor fruit be on the vines, though the labor of the olive may fail, and the fields yield no food, though the flock may be cut off from the fold, and there be no herd in the stalls, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will joy in the God of my salvation. By the help of the Holy Spirit, Father, help us to understand that you require that we make our relationship with you our highest priority, that we bring our deepest questions and turmoils before you, expecting you to answer and give us guidance. Help us to understand that we need to set aside a regular time and place that is holy to the Lord. Spend time listening for his word as we all read, study, and meditate on the scriptures. We should be faithful in daily prayer. I encourage us to document those things that the Lord speaks to us or quickens to our hearts. Record biblical promises he makes alive to us and hold fast to them, knowing they will come to pass. When all the circumstances of our life presents a negative picture in failure and loss, or when the natural reaction would be grief or complaint, this is the time to put faith in God and in his word. Thus we can see through God's eyes to the final glorious outcome. This brings worship and praise even before our circumstances have changed. Let's determine to praise and worship and thank God for his faithfulness, no matter how devastating the circumstances. Let's look with the eyes of faith at God's plan for the future and our destiny, being that it's God's will. He knows the thoughts that he has for every one of us, and the plans that he has for us are good. He's come to give us hope and a destiny. God bless you.
Thank you, Pastor Joyce, and we also pray for you for a speedy recovery. Thank you. If you'll all join me in the pledge, please. Ready, salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Moving on to public comment, the first 15 minutes of the meeting are reserved for members of the public to address the council on items which are within the subject matter jurisdiction of the council. Speakers shall be limited to 3 minutes. Speakers will be asked to identify themselves and state the subject of their comment. If the subject is an item on the agenda, the mayor has the option of asking the speaker to hold the comment until that item is called. Comments on items listed as public hearing on the agenda should be held until the hearing is opened. The council is prohibited by law from taking any action on matters discussed that are not on the agenda, and no adverse conclusions should be drawn if the council does not respond to public comment at this time. Is there anyone wishing to speak under this definition of public comment? Please come to the podium up here. And as a reminder, if you can give us your name and address, please. I'm terribly sorry. How about if we give you a cordless microphone? And you can certainly take a seat where you were, sir.
Hello, my name is Eddie Block. Hello, my name is Eddie Block. I live at 916 East Cleveland Avenue, Madera, California. And I'm a past exalted ruler of the Madera Elks Lodge, so you may recognize me. My wife owns a B&B thrift store, which just opened up here in downtown. We have a bad issue with the homeless, so bad. I call the police so much, I feel I became a nuisance to the police. I feel embarrassed when I call them, but I have nowhere else to call. So I'm wondering if you guys can help us out, maybe find some program, something that we can do to help clean up downtown. We're losing customers. I speak to people all the time. They're afraid to come downtown to shop because of the homeless. This week alone, we had to put up a new camera, and I probably had 4 people since Monday urinating on our wall. They sit there on C Street, and they drink. When they see the police pull up, they hide their drinks. So, of course, the police can't do anything about it. So we're just looking for some kind of help to rid this of downtown. People are afraid to come downtown, and that shouldn't be. We're trying to revitalize downtown, and we want to make it better. So I'm just asking if you guys can try and help find a program, because I really feel bad calling the police all the time. I do. And I'm sure they're sick and tired of hearing me calling them. So, the police have bigger things to worry about than the homeless problem. And I'm asking the city to help us. So, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Eddie. Thank you for coming down. And there is a homeless issue. We certainly recognize that. But I do want to offer to you to never be embarrassed to call the police. And you can never call the police too many times. So our chief is here with some other staff, and is duly noted. But please don't ever be afraid or embarrassed to call our police department. And thank you for doing so, and thank you for caring about our downtown and the community. Is there anybody else wishing to speak under public comment? Please come forward.
Hello, my name is Maria Contreras. I've been a resident here my whole life. I came as well as Mr. Block to speak about the homeless issue that we have. And there's been an issue now for many years, and it's rising. And I live and I work on the east side of Madera. And it's terrible that my children are afraid to walk home. And I see it every day. It's my everyday commute, travel. I live over there. And I hope that something can be done about it. And I hope that other residents in the community will come forward and hopefully find a solution. And I know it's not as easy as black and white. It's a very complex issue. And that's it. And I hope there's somebody else here that will speak as well.
Of course. Maria, thank you so much for coming down. Anybody else wishing to speak under public comment?
No, she did not.
Hi, my name's Kim Salter. I live at 1432 Penny Way. Concerning the homeless situation, there was a huge encampment about 2 weeks ago right before National Night Out. I called the police once. They told me that they would take care of the problem. Went back there that night at 8 o'clock. There were several people out there. The encampment was huge. I came home, looked up what kind of ordinances people have in other cities. There are 50 cities in the state that have ordinances that can take care of this issue within 24 hours. The encampment was still there in a couple days, so called the police department back. She said, we have to post signs, we have to do this, we have to do that. So this was a 2-week process. So in order for these people to be moved from that pathway, it was going to take literally 2 weeks. Fresno's getting ready to adopt an ordinance, a no camping ordinance. They're voting on it tomorrow. I would hope that this would be something that we as a city could do. Thank you.
Thank you for coming down. I appreciate it. Anybody else wishing to speak under public comment? Seeing none, I will close public comment and ask for a late distribution announcement.
Thank you, Mayor. Pursuant to Government Code Section 54957, members of the public are advised that documents related to the following agenda item were distributed to the council less than 72 hours before this meeting. Under Section B, Consent Calendar, Item B9, subject matter is an agreement with Madera Unified School District. A revised agreement was distributed to the council this evening. Extra copies are available at the podium for members of the public wishing a copy. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. And as a reminder, in our lobby, we have more chairs where you can actually see the meeting. Can we hear the meeting as well, or at least see the meeting in the television monitor out in our lobby if somebody needs to or would like to sit down? At this time, it's my honor and my pleasure to recognize Madera Babe Ruth 13-year-old All-Stars. Great-looking young men. Yeah. Absolutely. My boys played baseball. My son played Babe Ruth and had the pleasure of going to Arizona to play. And as a parent, it was memories that I will never forget. And it was never really about balls and strikes or who got a hit or who didn't. It was about teamwork. It was about camaraderie. It was about making memories. And most importantly, it was about representing the city of Madera. And so I know you young men want to hit home runs and do the best you can. And obviously, you guys did a fantastic job. But there were so many people here in Madera that you don't even know that were rooting for the blue and white, that were rooting for the M on your hat, that were rooting for Madera that was on your chest. And you made everybody in Madera very, very proud. And so we look for more great things for you young men in the future because you're young and you have great careers ahead of you. And we wanted to bring you down to City Council to be recognized for those efforts. So what I'd like to do right now for a little history and your guys' season is to bring up Coach Frank Borges. Frank?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, City Council members, and members of the public. It's truly a privilege to be here, to be recognized. At this time, I would like to introduce some of our board members that are here. Our Vice President is Hector Angulo, and Mr. Pisk is our player agent, community liaison, and my son Matthew is the equipment manager, and Louis Lopez is here somewhere. He's the Major League coordinator, and Terry Pisk and John Jasper are not here. They're our secretary and our treasurer. And the team, I mentioned to them that they have to introduce themselves and say whatever they want to say about themselves. So at this time, I'm going to start here with Josh and work this way and work back from the front. Stand up and say your name.
Let's get him a microphone first so everybody can hear.
Oh, hello. All right. My name is Joshua Castro. I played pitcher and first base. Yeah, okay. Oh, I'm number 27, and I'm 14 years old.
All right. My name is J.R. Garcia. I'm number 11. I play right field, and I'm 13 years old.
My name is David Ramirez. I'm number 22, and I play left, center, and pitcher, and I'm 13.
Hi, my name is David Zavala. I'm number 3, and I play shortstop.
Hi, my name is Ivan Ponce, and I'm number 1, and I play second base.
My name is Murph Gray. I'm number 6, and I play center field.
My name is Jonathan Spraggins, and my number is 2, and I play right field.
My name is Michael Monreal. I'm number 40. I play first base and pitcher.
My name is Evan Candelaria, and I play third base, and I'm number 34.
My name is Matthew DeFranco. I'm number 19. I play right field.
My name is Anthony Gamez, and I'm number 28, and I played right field and catcher.
I am David Wanji. I'm number 99, and I'm the catcher.
Give him a hopefully that's their first step in public speaking. I want to talk to you a little bit about the history of Madera Babe Ruth. Our first charter was in 1954, so we've had Babe Ruth for 64 years. And this is only the third team in the history, 64 years, that's made it to the regionals. So it was a big achievement, believe me. And they're only 13 years old, but you can already see leadership and community leaders in the future. And I say that because I was privileged to coach the first 13-year-old team back in 2009 that went to the regionals. And 2 members of that team are now protecting our city as police officers. So it's pretty awesome. And then when I reflect back on that, I could see why they're police officers, because the pressure was never too much for them. They were always calm, and they were leaders, and especially team players. And Madera Babe Ruth, we played for 6 weeks in our regular season. We encompass about 100 to 120 kids every year, depending on the year. We have 8 major league teams, and these boys were chosen by the coach, the managers of the other teams. They're the ones that vote for 10 players to be in the all-star team of the 13-year-olds. And then the coaches, myself, I'm the manager, and my son Matthew is one of the coaches, and Chuy Garcia is the other coach. And we chose the other 5 kids to make the team. And I also forgot to mention there's 2 players that are not here, Charlie Monteroso and Jackson Smith. And so the boys were chosen. We went, played the district, and we won the district. We were undefeated, and then we moved on to the state, and Bakersfield was the host, Northwest Bakersfield, and we were undefeated there as well. And there was 5 boys from our team that made all tournament team, and the tournament teams are chosen by the committee, the host committee. We have nothing to do with that. And David Zavala was the most valuable player. David Ramirez, Josh Castro, and Murph Gray, and Charlie Monteroso was also all tournament team. So we won the state tournament for only the 3rd team in 64 years. Now how do we get to Vernal, Utah? It's a 14-and-a-half-hour drive. And and we tried to have the parents go with us. And so we had to do a massive fundraising just in 10 days. And we had a little bit of experience because just 3 years ago, in 2014, like Mayor said, his son was on that team, and we did a pretty good job sending those boys, 14-year-olds, to Arizona. And so we accomplished that, and it was a great experience. And I think most of these boys will be freshmen in high school this year. So they're going to get better coaching. They're going to get more competition. So next year I have no doubt in my mind how far they can go. And we won 8 games before we lost our first game in Utah. It wasn't fun losing the first game after 8 wins in a row, but the only consolation is the team that beat us, they're currently in Arkansas in the World Series, and they're undefeated. They've won 4 games in a row, and all they got to do is win 2 more, and they're the World Series champions. And the host committee over there told us that the history of the last 10 years is the winner of our regional is usually the World Series champion. So you can see what kind of competition we had, what kind of ability these boys have. You know, I don't want to speak too much about myself because get too much any credit because I only had these boys for 2.5, 3 weeks to get them to play these tournaments. It's their parents and their past coaches. I want to recognize them, even though most of them are not here. But they're the ones that really prepare these boys to play at this level. I was fortunate enough to be at the moment and be able to coach them. So I would like to thank the mayor. When we went to Utah, we had a host barbecue, and we had 200 of these pins, Madera City pins that the mayor gave us. We had 200 of them. We gave each boy 14 of them, and they go out and trade pins with the other nine teams. We had teams from Hawaii and from Arizona, Nevada, and Utah, and Northern California and Southern California. So it was an experience. We also took 10 baskets of gifts of raisins, almonds, and pistachios, and other goodies that are raised and processed, packaged here in our community. And we took that as a gift. We gave a basket to each one of the teams during that barbecue. It was a tremendous success because we had 15 members from Madera there. We were by far the largest group of people. Between parents, players, coaches, and siblings, we had 52 of us. And we were, I'm really proud how the parents conducted themselves, because in the heat of the moment, sometimes things are said, things happen. And I not only inherited a good group of players, but I also inherited some pretty good parents. So I didn't have to deal with any negative issues. So I would like at this time to have 3 boys that will come up here and speak on their own experience. And I don't want to make it too long, but thank you for the moral support and the financial support. And especially thank you for recognizing these boys. It's really great that in the future, like I said, we had 2 officers come out of that group of 13. Who knows? There might be 2 or 3 mayors out of here. Okay. So David Ramirez, anyone want to come up?
Hello, my name's David. The trip to Utah was a long ride, but once we got there, it was a fun experience for us to win all these games and play different teams from around the state, United States, or around our regional. I'd like to thank all you guys for help supporting us and help fundraising all the money to help get us there and help get us to Utah. It was a fun trip, but we won 2 games, we lost 2, and we got 4th? Fourth? Yeah, 4th place, and I got all tournament award, so.
Multi-sport player, I see. Good for you.
Good evening. My name is David Zavala, a.k.a. Pito. My position is shortstop. I was voted MVP in our state tournament. And I had the privilege to attend Utah for regionals. The experience with my teammate is brotherhood. We played great together in Utah. It was good for everyone. The experience was fun. Everyone was friendly to us. Everywhere in Utah, there was dinosaur statues. The food was good. Let's see. Sightseeing was amazing. I also visited the Flaming Gorge, Red Canyon, Dinosaur Trail. And thank you for having us here tonight. Thank you, coaches, my teammates, and all the families for having one of the best summers ever.
Michael, I knew you would come up here and speak. This is the next mayor of Madera, right?
Hi, my name is Michael Monreal, and I'd like to thank the mayor and city council members for having us here. We had less than 2 weeks to fundraise money to go to Utah, and the support from the city was amazing. And it took 14 hours to get there, but it was such a great experience and best summer of my life so far. Thank you.
Well, Skipper, on behalf of the mayor, I have certificates with names and numbers for each of the kids. But in the spirit of time, what I'd really like to do is to get the whole team up here on the dais with the rest of the council so we can take some pictures. Is that good? Is that all right? Come on, boys, let's do that. Just make your way up there and make yourself at home. And all right, you guys ready to smile for the camera? I'm going to jump right here in the middle. All right. You guys look out there to Mom and Dad and Madera Tribune and smile big. What do you want where? See everybody's face? Yeah?
Who's the official picture?
Make sure you're showing your face. All right. All right, guys, congratulations. That's awesome. My chair back?
Are you sure this is yours?
I don't know. I'm going to find out right now. Yeah, but this is yours. Somebody got like white stuff on it. That's going to clear our.
Oh, look at our audience leaving us.
Everybody's leaving us.
They're listening to good stuff.
I know. I told them to hang out. They're like, look at Brent. Look at Brent's all excited.
Yeah.
Look how excited Brent looks.
It's Merced, ain't it?
Merced County.
Huh?
Big school?
My graduating class was 94.
Packed the house.
That's the year I graduated.
Should have sold burritos or tacos or something. Could have made a few bucks, huh? You know, it really is an honor to recognize teams in Madera, whether it be Little League or Bobby Sox, or not only teams like our robotics team, and these young men and women that I do believe that you will see up here in the dais one day, and there are future business leaders and our future elected officials, and so I thank my colleagues and staff for allowing me to take the time to recognize those teams, because like my son who played 4 years ago, I honestly don't remember who made an out and who hit a home run, but I do remember all the kids, you know, having that camaraderie and that fellowship and that teamwork, and that's something that they'll take within the rest of their lives. So thank you so very much for that. Now on to item A1 is our workshop, which will be the first of 3 workshops in a series on cannabis and California cities.
Mayor, I might just jump in and introduce. Dave Hale is a colleague of mine with I think I first met him with the city attorneys group. He represents various cities and small districts in the state, and has dealt with the cannabis issue, I believe, in 3 different cities, if I'm not mistaken, and has way more years of experience in this than I do. So very knowledgeable in the subject, so I'll just turn it over to Dave.
Thank you very much. As your city attorney mentioned, I've been in municipal law work for about 30 years, chief assistant city attorney for Fresno until 2013, established my own law office, and currently represent or have represented the city attorney in the cities of Tulare, King City, and currently City of Grover Beach and JPA Fire Suppression District over there. So in each of those cities, I've worked with them in the creation of their marijuana ordinances, and have just recently finished both a land use ordinance and a regulatory ordinance for the City of Grover Beach. I'm not sure if it's good or bad because the industry has said it's a pretty good one, so not sure, but in any event, what I wanted to do is go through a little bit of legislative history for you. As most of you may remember, back in '96, Proposition 215 essentially decriminalized the use of medical marijuana. I'll essentially sort of start out with the concept of what does decriminalize mean. I'll get later in my talk in regards to what the federal statutes represent, but for the most part, the use of marijuana in the state of California is technically not legal. What California essentially did...
Sorry, I can't hear you.
I'll speak a little closer to the mic. Is that better? Essentially, what California did so that it made it compatible legally with the Controlled Substance Act of the federal government is to essentially decriminalize it, sort of making them coexist without being in conflict with each other. So therefore, in that concept, it's a legal concept or theory that allows the state of California and most of the other states in the union that have essentially decriminalized, allowed it to be essentially used and possessed and so forth related to the local regulations as California essentially has, Colorado has. In 2015, there were 3 bills, Assembly Bill 243, 266, and Senate Bill 643 that essentially created the Medical Cannabis Regulatory and Safety Act that primarily dealt with medical marijuana. Then in 2016, there was a Proposition 62 that passed that was essentially the Adult Use of Marijuana Act that allowed recreational. The two acts in and of themselves were to a certain degree inconsistent and had inconsistencies. They were difficult to read. So essentially the governor created Section 200 of the trailer bill to their proposed budget that created essentially the MACRSA, which was the Medicinal Adult Use Cannabis Regulation and Safety Act. Combining both of those together, it functionally repealed the Medical Cannabis Regulation and Safety Act, put them all together. So what we're here today basically for me to give you a little bit of background, the context of what are the benefits of doing this in your community and what are some of the challenges that you're going to see. The 3 greatest ones are the creation of tax revenue. Obviously, that's what most agencies, 2 of the agencies I've represented have done ballot measures in the general election back in 2016 that adopted tax measures for their local agencies. Job creation. This is going to be a huge industry, which I'll show you in a minute, and the medicinal value that it brings to your community. Tax revenue. Grover Beach is a city that is a general law city that has about 13,500 people in it. Yet it will produce somewhere in the neighborhood of about $1.5 to $2 million worth of revenue to its general fund. That's a fairly sizable amount of money for its general fund for a city that size. Sales tax is another component within which you can obtain revenue, with the exception of medical marijuana. General taxes, as defined in a Proposition 218, have to be done at a general election. So the next time you have an election, which I believe is going to be a year and a half from now, when your electeds are voted into office, is the earliest that you could put a ballot measure on. Job creation. This information was obtained from New Frontier Data, but they're anticipating 250,000 jobs will be created by 2020. Currently in 2016, the revenue generated by both medical and recreational marijuana was about $7.2 billion. They anticipate in 2025 it'll be over $22 billion. Currently, in the context of manufacturing, industry, and governmental jobs over the next 5 to 10 years, we're actually seeing a decrease in the available jobs. This industry, you're going to see a significant growth. They're looking at about a 17% compound annual rate increase. But for the most part, your benefits, as I'll explain a little bit later, will primarily come from what you authorize within your community, what you allow and what you intend to tax. I wanted to show you a couple of pictures. These are pictures of indoor grows, functionally 3A permits. These are all done under artificial lighting for the most part. You'll see that they grow them on tables, part of your regulations, and I'll explain that in a minute, but what I've typically done consistent with state laws to create a land use ordinance, and in that ordinance it establishes as a text amendment the right in certain zone districts for you to put this use. You create a regulatory ordinance. That ordinance is pretty much the nuts and bolts of how and what you allow them to do. For the most part, in these cases, these are single stacked. You will see that the industry, for the most part, once you start down this road, will come in and propose things like stacking, where they would like to have what you see as, let's assume this is a 22,000 square foot base, they would like to see stacking on tables above that. But again, that's up to the individual agency. Manufacturing is essentially the process of where they take the harvested product, and they produce it and extract it down into honey oil or extracts like you see on the right-hand side. The machines that you see there on the left are CO2 machines. They're considered level 1. Level 1 is a non-volatile substance. State will permit, if you're using CO2 or water for extraction purposes where they don't explode, theoretically, then they will allow you to, under level 1, use these kinds of extractors. Those long tubes, they fill with the marijuana as it's cultivated, compress it to about 2,000 pounds per square inch. They extract out of it a substance, byproduct that goes up, or a product that goes up into those red tubes through the roof, into other areas where they manufacture it, probably refine it 2 or 3 more times down to what you see on the right-hand side, which is functionally honey oil. To give you a context of what that means is that a typical joint, this is not from personal experience, a typical joint will represent about 1 to maybe 2% THC. When you have extracted honey oil can be in the neighborhood of 80 to 90% THC. The equivalent of a high from a joint you can get from a drop on the tip of a toothpick of honey oil. Testing laboratories, once a product is essentially produced in the manufacturing business, they produce all kinds of things. Essentially, the medicine, essentially people take, will have different varying degrees of THC in it, depending upon what's prescribed. It can progressively get larger and larger to bigger doses if that's what is prescribed and what you need for your medicinal purposes. The testing labs make sure that that percentage of whatever that THC component is accurate, so as you continue over the years to take it, you're getting the exact same amount of THC or medication. The instrument on the left is a mass spec machine. What that does and what the testing labs do is essentially look at whether there are pesticides or there are other pollutants that would be in it that functionally you don't want to eat. So for the most part, it's a healthy product when you're actually taking it. Distributors and dispensaries, it's a retail side. Essentially, when the products are ultimately made, they make things like if you go to the store and you see those little packages of breath mints, well, now they make those where you can flip them off, stick them in your tongue, and instead of getting good breath, you get a high. So you buy those essentially at the retail markets. In the state law, when it says or refers to a storefront, this is what they're talking about. And then under the recent legislation, they've allowed what's essentially called micro-businesses. This is the marijuana equivalent of a microbrewery. They essentially grow it, manufacture it, produce it, and retail it out of the same store. They're usually smaller. They're like a boutique winery. They're usually smaller type of operations. The medicinal purposes, you essentially have 2 components in marijuana. You have CDP cannabidiols, and then you have I'm not a scientist, so tetrahydrocannabinol. That's essentially the high, the hallucinogen effect of The CDB is essentially more of the chemical they have found in marijuana that helps with a lot of the medicinal, such as seizures, epilepsy, those kinds of things, for whatever reasons. And again, I'm not an expert in the medical side of this, but the CDBs essentially can inhibit seizures, and they have found it to have worked very well with children, small children who have those kinds of medical problems. But it's used, has been used for glaucoma, cancer patients, epilepsy, seizures, anxiety, Alzheimer's, multiple sclerosis. I have been through 10 to 15 public hearings, and I've had many licensed doctors get up and testify to the fact that there is no medical benefit to marijuana. Back in 2016, the United States Department of Justice and the DEA looked at reclassifying marijuana, and I'll get to that in a minute, but on the federal side, it's currently considered a Schedule I drug. They chose not to do that simply because they ultimately came to the conclusion that there's no medical benefit, and in fact, it's subject to abuse. That's the definition of a Schedule I drug. So ultimately, I have heard much testimony over the many years I've been doing this of the fact that there is people who swear by the medicinal effects and purposes and benefits of marijuana, and so that debate will go on until I think there's further medical analysis and studies done. Federal regulation. This is probably one of the most interesting topics at this point in time for you if you're going to get into this business, and that is California, as I said, has not made the use of marijuana legal. What California has done is decriminalized it. Most of the states that use this have done the same thing. Federal law does consider marijuana a Schedule I controlled substance. That falls into the same category as heroin and LSD. In my discussions with some of the top enforcement agents for the U.S. Department of DEA and the U.S. Department of Justice, I called one of the leading enforcement officers for the U.S. DEA in Colorado when I was starting to write my first marijuana ordinance, and I said, help me out. Tell me what I need to know as a municipal attorney representing my clients as to how I draft these. And he was kind of the old cranky old guy, I could tell over the telephone. And he said to me, he said, Mr. Harrell, let me explain something to you. Under federal law, the possession, use, control, testing, manufacturing, and cultivation of marijuana is a federal crime. And if I didn't get it, he repeated it a second time. So I said, thank you very much. I think our call's over with.
David, I'm sorry, I hate to interrupt. I know you have a long presentation, but I'm just going to ask if you could maybe speak up just a little bit more. I want to make sure we get you on record. Not everybody can hear what you're saying.
Sure. I'm sorry. Is that better?
That's much better.
Okay, cool.
Thank you.
Last time I got too close to this, and it was not good. In discussions with a lot of California attorneys, municipal law attorneys, there has been a discussion over what happens in the context of a federal enforcement action. And in fact, the feds have come in and confiscated marijuana on sites in California where, in fact, they're assumed to be growing it legally. There's a call memo that was issued, and this was issued by the United States Department of Justice. I didn't make copies for you, but I have one that I can give to your city attorney that can pass out to you. It was passed out on August 29, 2013. Under the Obama administration, functionally what the U.S. DOJ said is that if local agencies are in fact imposing and adopting very stringent regulations related to the control of marijuana, and in that letter they cited 8 purposes that the Department of Justice has for the enforcement of marijuana, and it's consistent with those purposes and objectives of the U.S. Department of Justice. For the most part, they're going to leave you alone. Now, at the very end of that memo, they made it very clear that they were not waiving any rights of the federal government to enforce any law that is otherwise violated. I won't go through all of them and bore you, but functionally their concern was they don't want revenues of any drug sales going to organized crime. They don't want the cartel, and they don't want the Russian organized crime involved. They also don't want marijuana grown in a state that authorizes it and have it transported over the state boundaries to other states where they don't authorize it. If those regulations of a local agency doesn't make sure those kinds of things, don't preclude those kinds of things, they may very well come in and enforce against you. banking, recognize that when you get into this right now, this is an all-cash business. I went up to a manufacturer in Santa Rosa, one of probably the biggest and most sophisticated in the state of California right now. And I asked him, I said, so how do you bank? He said, we don't. I said, so how do you pay all your employees? And this was in a huge industrial building with, I don't know how many employees, but I saw quite a few of them. And he says, we pay their salary in cash. And then we rotate the day every month that we pay them so they're not walking out into the parking lot and getting robbed. I said, okay. So I said, so you don't take your money to a bank? And he says, no, we have a very large vault in the back. So I went back to my client and I said, who do we bank with? And he told me, and I said, well, let's go down and talk to him. So we did, and we said, tell me, are you going to accept this cash? There was a pregnant pause. And they said, well, we have to talk to our corporate headquarters. 2 weeks later, they said, well, we've gone up the food chain to our national headquarters, and we're talking with them. That was 2 months ago, and they still haven't gotten back to us. So as of right now, we don't have a commitment from our bank. They will accept the cash. So we're installing a very large vault, and we're installing security procedures as to how we're going to deal with the money ultimately. And if we do get it to the point where we can deposit it to a bank, then our police will be escorting our finance people with large bags of cash and take it to the bank. But for the most part, it's an issue that I think ultimately will be resolved, because I think ultimately the federal government will decide how they're going to deal with this. But as of right now, it's an all-cash business. So we've talked a lot about the benefits. One of the challenges that you're going to find out that will come, and it's going to vary from business or from agency to agency. It has between the three agencies I've represented. But you're going to have to figure out where you're going to put this, because we've done it both ways. We've done an overlay district where we've limited to a very small area of the city, or we've done it in a specific zone district and said anywhere in that zone district you can do it. Both of them have created significant pushback from the community. For the most part, your typical businessman does not want this next door. We have in Grover Beach a dance studio. That dance studio is not considered a school under the definition of a school under state law. So there's no requirement for them to be 600 feet from it. And apparently one of the applicants for a dispensary bought the property next door. They have over 100 little kids that show up every day. And so when we had our public meetings, not only did the owners show up, but so did the parents of all 100 kids. So it was a standing room only event. And there was a lot of political pressure and pushback over the fact that they did not want these kinds of uses next to them. So you're going to find that compatibility issue from your zoning. And the other problem that you're going to have is that many businesses within that particular area, once the ordinances were finalized, closed their doors and left. We even had one of the largest employers and businesses in the city come to us saying they were about to do that, and we rezoned the property. So it's a potential problem. Monopoly of land use was one that I personally, when I first started this, never saw it coming. But in one of my clients, who was an ag-based community, we had agreed to go forward with cultivation and approved ordinances that allowed that. And an investment company out of San Francisco came and bought basically every piece of land that was available. Then they bought pieces of property that were already occupied on leases, walked into the leaseholders, said, your lease is terminated, and oh, by the way, here's a check for what remains on your lease. They said, thank you very much, we're out of here. So I had an investor from LA call me, and he said, how come you guys are creating a monopoly? And he said, we're not. And he said, well, we're told that we want to operate a marijuana facility in your city. We have to go talk to these people in San Francisco. I said, I can't control the market, but you have to come to us for permits. But functionally what they had done was bought most every piece of property that was available. There was another consequence related to that. That was a newspaper article came out about that time where it was M1 property. That M1 property was originally, prior to our ordinances, selling for $45,000 an acre. It was now selling for $460,000 an acre. So what the landowners were doing were seeing a cash cow. So the other problem that we had in the context of displacement of businesses was they were going into their tenants, and if they weren't protected under their lease, like on a month-to-month tenancy, they were more or less terminating the lease, closing the doors, and getting rid of them, turning around and selling their property. So there's can be the potential of a significant issue there in terms of maintaining your current businesses. Code enforcement. Code enforcement is something that every jurisdiction that I've talked to is indicated is a big problem, because there are very sophisticated investment companies that are now getting into this business. You saw the monies that are involved with this organization and this industry, and it's huge. So it's going to draw very sophisticated people who are going to abide by, to the T, what you ask them to do and what your ordinances say. But this is an industry that has been on the criminal side and under the table for 30, 40 years or more. So in Colorado, they advised me of the fact that you will have a certain element that will come in and not abide by your ordinances. They have a particular issue in Colorado called inversion. Our licenses that are issued in Grover Beach have a maximum of 22,000 square feet of space, or square feet of canopy. That will only produce a certain amount of product. They grow it up in the hills illegally, bring it in the back door, sell it out the front door as an illegal product. So even though they're appearing to abide by your ordinances, they are in fact making more money by doing it illegally. That imposes upon you the ability to have to increase your code enforcement and your law enforcement. We're bringing on 2 additional officers, an additional full-time code officer to do nothing but marijuana. You have a seed to sale tracking process. You track every single plant they have and the total amount that they can produce and the amount of product that will be produced. That takes time, it takes money, and it takes people. So you're going to have to increase your code, you're going to have to increase your budget. Now, a lot of that is cost neutral to you because every year they're required to come back and get a cannabis permit. That cannabis permit has a fee. That fee has a cost recovery for a lot of that. I mentioned Prop 26 because we're still looking at that issue. The illegal element of it that myself or your city attorney is going to have to go into court, shut these people down, may or may not be something that under Prop 26 you can include into your fees and maybe a cost you have to bear.
What was that called? Where you kind of mumbled there.
I'm sorry.
Where you're dealing with they're growing it in the mountains and then bringing it back. You said Grover Beach. It's called a what?
They essentially.
I'm sorry. You still haven't answered my question. It's called a what?
They called it now I'm trying to think of what the term was that they used. Essentially, what they're doing is it's an infusion, essentially, or inversion of bringing in outside marijuana illegally grown. And if you're not watching it, you're not tracking it, and you're not keeping an account of what comes in and what goes out, functionally, they can sell it out the front door as legal product under their licensing. Okay, so for the most part, they're making a lot more money than and growing a lot more, distributing a lot more than they're legally authorized to do.
And you call that an inversion?
I think that's what the term was that the DEA told me when I talked to him about it. One of the things I wanted to go over is sort of relate to Colorado as an example because they've been in this business for a long time. And one of the things that they created in Colorado by the United States government passing a particular statute was a Rocky Mountain High-Intensity Drug Trafficking Area Report. It went through and looked at things like driving impairment, the number of youths and the number of adults using it, the number of emergency and hospital room related admissions, children ingesting marijuana, and essentially sort of capped what the overall benefits and detriment was to the organization. I'll just kind of breeze through some of this because I know I've been talking for quite a while, but in 2014 was when they created the retail side of the business in Colorado, and they had a 32% increase in marijuana-related traffic deaths. In 2014, the marijuana-related traffic deaths increased 92% from 2010 to 2014, when all other Non-marijuana-related traffic deaths increased only 8%. Marijuana-related traffic deaths were approximately 20% of all traffic deaths in 2014, compared to half that, 10% 5 years earlier. In the youth, their percentage was 11.16% of ages 12 to 17, nationally 17.15%. Drug-related suspensions in schools increased 40% between 2008 and 13, and positive THC testing for probationers of 12 to 17 years of age increased 20%. Adult marijuana use saw very similar statistics. 29% of college-age students were considered current marijuana users, compared to 18.9% nationally in 2013. Functionally, there were just, to sort of summarize all of this, it's in the documentation I gave you, there were significant increases both in traffic accidents and drug-related emergency room admissions. You can see these statistics here. Colorado data overall saw generation of sales of recreational marijuana of 2014, a 52.5 million increase to 200 million in 2016. It's a big business. 51.3% of the funds have gone to schools in Colorado. Majority of the cities have banned recreational marijuana businesses. One of the things that you'll find is that the THC potency in the strains of marijuana that they're growing has substantially increased, up to 12.55%, as compared to 20 years earlier, 3.96%. And ironically, in Denver, there are more licensed medical marijuana centers than pharmacies. So, in summary, if this is something that you're looking at doing, then obviously the benefits that you want to consider are the tax revenues that you will get. One of the things that every agency that I spoke with has talked to me about, and my clients have not gotten to the point where they've started to realize the tax revenues, so we don't have any personal experience. But you have to net out what you believe your gross is going to be related to your costs and expenses, the secondary effects that will come from the industry. The medicinal uses are definitely there. There's certainly an ongoing debate over what those are and to what degree they may be. But I think ultimately that will be researched in much greater extent in the future. But as of right now, there are certainly physicians that swear by it, and a lot of children are being treated for seizures with it. Creation of jobs is definitely going to be another area. But then again, you have to net out of that the lost jobs of businesses that leave your community. Challenges of the land use impacts, potential loss of jobs of the business that leaves, and your secondary costs and impacts. So that pretty much is my summary of what I think your pros and cons are going to be. I'll certainly entertain any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, David. You obviously bring a lot of pros and cons, which is why we're having these workshops in the first place, to really have a very informative discussion as to where we go from here. So I'm going to call on Councilman Rodriguez. He has a couple of questions.
Mr. Hale, I just wanted to ask, I know with some of the challenges that you had brought up earlier in regards to, maybe, I don't know if there's a criminal aspect or not, but would you say that that's something that we are going to face regardless of how we either pass an ordinance or not? Do you see that the activity, the fact that it's not legal in our city, you're more likely to see more use of this, possibly. I don't know if the increase of some of those, that data that you showed us there from that organization would have an impact or no impact whether we make it have some type of ordinance or not.
The answer to your question is yes. I would hazard a guess you have it in your city right now. Santa Rosa, when they adopted their ordinance, and when they actually permitted the manufacturing plant I spoke about, they discovered that right around the block was another manufacturing plant that had been operating for years. They never knew it. So I will hazard a guess it's operating in your city right now. Obviously, once you adopt these ordinances, you're going to have significantly greater amount of these businesses, both legal and illegal, within your community, which will task you and task your code enforcement in the sense that even the legal ones, and I won't mention any names, but there was one particular business that I'm aware of operating one jurisdiction that was doing so under a license, had close relationships with the local city management and city, both the city attorney and the city manager, and were raided by the police and shut down because they were operating a level 2 lab in the back room and they were only licensed for a level 1, and they were using butane in a manner that could have exploded and taken the building out. They corrected the problem, and everybody's, I think, happy now. But the concern will be that you will have code enforcement issues, both with the people you've licensed and with the new people that come into town. We had kind of an interesting, we all kind of laughed, but one of our public meetings, recognizing there is no authority in Grover Beach for licensing of marijuana up until we approved the ordinances, we had a gentleman walk up and he says, I am sure glad you guys are doing this. I am so happy, man. I'm so-and-so at such and such an address, and I've had a manufacturing lab running now for 15 years, and I just think this is the greatest thing. And I texted the city, police chief across the way from me. He said, you get his name and address? Because he'd been operating in the city illegally for 15 years, but we never knew it. So I think to answer your question is you will have, I think, more of a problem once you start this, more of a code enforcement issue, I should say. But it doesn't mean that by not doing it, you're not going to have similar type issues. And again, it also depends a lot on what your local agencies around you do, whether your county ultimately decides to go forward and do this. I don't know whether the county of Madera has considered doing it or not, but that can also be a factor in what you see going on in your city.
Now, did you say, Mr. Hale, that you serve cities where these ordinances are actively in play at this moment? Are you a city attorney for any of these cities that currently have?
Both the city of King City has an ordinance on cultivation, and we just recently adopted, a matter of a few weeks ago, our regulatory land use ordinances in the city of Grover Beach. City of Grover Beach allowed functionally everything, with the exception of level 2 manufacturing. Well, they actually authorized level 2 manufacturing with just essentially one butane, one type of volatile solvent.
And do you see these challenges that you presented here with the city of Kings, or the county of Kings?
We have not issued any licenses yet.
Okay, so you just
we're still going through a process. In fact, tomorrow I'm going to be there all day doing interviews on 12 candidates for dispensaries. We're issuing 2 dispensary permits only, and we have 12 who have applied. So we're going to be interviewing 12 of them.
And have you seen any issues in regards to the monopoly side as far as those 2 cities that you...
Yes, King City. King City was essentially an ag-based community, and the investment group out of San Francisco came in and bought up pretty much most of the M1 property. And as I said, there was a newspaper article in the local newspaper there that said that the property values had gone to over $450,000 within a matter of a couple weeks. And functionally, it does a lot of things. I mean, if I'm a landowner and I'm sitting on $45,000 worth of property, and all of a sudden that property is worth $450,000, I have multiple acres, I'm thinking there's a better way of making money.
And one last question in regards to banking. You had brought up that at this point it looks like this is all cash industry. I know Colorado and other states have been doing this for quite some time. Any talk about possibly like cryptocurrency or some type of different, Bitcoin or something that might be utilized? Has any other city brought that up at all? Or?
The industry itself has talked about opening their own banks. Obviously, won't be federally chartered, but that's a consideration. I know of some banks who are accepting money from local agencies once the cash is given to the local agency takes it to the bank, gives it to the bank will accept it as tax revenue. So not all banks do that. Ours right now, as I indicated, is not made a decision yet that they're going to do that.
If I can interject just a minute. David, when you and I had a discussion, you talked about the growth and role of savings and loans in accepting money. Could you speak to that as well?
Not sure I remember that conversation. There are a number of, well, let me articulate this. Of all of the issues that I present tonight, I think that issue is probably the least of your concerns. At the banking level, the federal government level, they're looking at this issue, and they're going to do one of two things. They're going to make a national-wide policy that they're not going to allow this, and that you're going to see the feds commence enforcement. Or they're going to back away from their position, or more similar to the Cole position of saying, well, we're going to allow us to mutually coexist and allow the states to go forward and allow banking in that context. So I don't see this as an issue that will last too long without being decided. If it's decided in the context where they're going to shut this down and they're going to start enforcing against both recreational and medical marijuana, the banking issue becomes a non-issue at that point.
You know, and looking at how other states have operated, and I mean the amounts of revenue that they've generated, I mean, I would have thought that at least the feds would at that point, I mean, they're over $200 million. I'm not sure this is a billion-dollar industry, so I'm curious to see if you've had any insight as far as how the feds really look at this here, as more and more states are starting to adopt or at least pass legislation to allow the legalization of marijuana, whether it be a medicinal or...
That's a very, very, very good question. A lot of us have been watching Sessions and what he has been saying. Obviously, had the Democrats won in the last election at the presidential level, this would be all a non-issue. I have absolutely no idea where they're going to go with this at this point, and most of my counterparts don't really know either. We can conclude, I know that the governor of the state of Colorado has basically said that his position is, his code of ethics is defend the state of Colorado against all foreign and domestic issues, and so he's going to continue to go forward and push for states' rights, and so are most of probably the other states like Washington, Oregon, and California, obviously. So I think I can't answer your question because I'm not that tied into Washington politics, but it's just time to wait and see what Congress obviously will do. The reclassification, quite frankly, of marijuana, other than a Schedule I drug, will be probably one of the first indicators of whether the federal government wants to really do something different with this. As of right now, as of summer of 2016, they did not want to do that.
I know this is a workshop, so I'll allow my colleagues to maybe ask some other questions. I might come back and ask you a couple of questions there.
Of course, thank you. Councilman Oliver.
Thank you, Mr. Hale, for the presentation. You certainly bring a unique perspective, and I thought it was eye-opening and concerning in some fronts as well. And I have several questions. I'm going to just blow right through them.
Sure.
So first, on page 2 in the staff report, you have a line here that says, this is with regard to sales taxes. Since these are general taxes, they must be voted on at a regularly scheduled general election for the members of the governing body for the local agency. Does that mean your local city council has to vote as to what, whether or not to move forward with this type of use with which we'd be able to collect, let's say, an 8.5% sales tax, which is what our rate is today? Or are you suggesting that you'd have to go to a ballot initiative for a general sales tax to maybe go above and
Well,
beyond?
typically what my agencies have done, both King City and Grover Beach, was the council adopted a resolution and also for the purposes of putting it on the ballot. And then it went onto the ballot, both cities at the same time in 2016, and was approved by the voters. I think the vote in Grover Beach was 70-30. So it did go through a ballot process, which it has to do under Prop 218, but the council was the one that initiated it and voted on it.
And just for frame of reference, how much were they increasing the sales tax?
That wasn't a sales tax. We did essentially under the state
Property tax?
statutes. No, you can do it. It's functionally an excise tax.
Okay.
And we did it 5% on medical, 10% on adult recreational.
Okay. And then I think the city of Coalinga, do they kind of go about it similarly? I thought I remembered seeing that they kind of applied almost like a property tax, not so much a property tax, but based on the square footage of the facility. And
it would have been an excise tax too, but there have been done by many agencies. They've done it differently. So we did ours based on sales, gross sales. They can do it on a square foot basis. We did, I think, part of ours on sales, part of ours on cultivation was on gross footage or per square foot basis of canopy. So you have a number of different options on how you structure it, but they're almost all excise taxes.
Okay, thank you. How does the state law, and I think the acronym's like MACRA, we'll just call it, how does it address transportation across county lines or even cities or jurisdictions that don't allow it? Is it pretty...
You can refuse to permit the actual... In other words, if I wanted to start a transportation company and I wanted to have a yard and I wanted to have trucks and all that kind of stuff, and my offices were going to be based out of the city of Madera, you can refuse to permit that.
I'm thinking, let's say that the county of Madera allows for the cultivation of commercial marijuana, and Company A has to move that product to where their customer base is, maybe somewhere else in the state. How do they address that?
They do. You have no authority whatsoever to regulate in any way transportation of marijuana through your city. You do have the ability to regulate licensing them operating out of your city. But if they're using city streets, public highways, you have no authority under the state statutes to regulate that.
Have any of your client cities expressed any concern as far as the administration taking a position similar to how they've treated certain communities or jurisdictions that may be seen as not complying with immigration and customs enforcement, for example? Have any of your client cities expressed similar concern if the administration or Department of Justice were to take a similar look at those agencies that may be contrary to federal law and permit this type of use? I'm just curious if that's gone into their contemplation at all, or if that's something that we should be really worried about as well, because I would imagine that if they could withhold federal funding or threaten that for those particular purposes, perhaps they could look at this as well.
Yes, there has been in the past. I guess I want to be a little careful about how I answer this in the context of naming names, but yes, we have had issues where we've asked the DEA to come in and they refuse to do so, even though it's a known violation of federal law, and have left it to the local agencies to handle it. In the context of the most recent statutes that were adopted this year in 2017, the state has allowed local agencies, I kind of love this, but their position was if you enter into an agreement with the state, they will allow you to enforce their laws. So basically, they're backing away from the enforcement, letting local agencies do it, and giving you the authority to do that by entering into an agreement. So you have essentially that power to enforce both state licensing and local licensing if you enter into an agreement with the state to do it. But I can't answer your question in the context because it's so new.
Sure.
We're not in an enforcement stage yet. We're just going through the licensing process. But in some of my previous clients, when we were looking at enforcing some of the previous marijuana, subsequent to the issuance of the Cole memo, we had difficulty getting the feds to participate.
And then on page 5 in the staff report, you reference the potential for private actions against the city. I understand if we can't elaborate a great deal there, but can you speak to that even in a broad sense as to what that private action could potentially be?
Well, it is a potential. I can answer your question, but I don't like creating roadmaps for people to sue you.
Sure.
But yes, under RICO, you do have the ability to. RICO are usually
What's
action.
RICO?
It's actually an organized crime. It's a statute, federal statute created for suppressing organized crime. It was created by the federal government. But actually, you can potentially file private RICO actions. It's usually done by the federal government, but it does allow under federal law for private actions to be filed.
Okay. And I think my last, question for now, obviously you've been exposed to a lot of different types of ordinances, and you've seen your various client cities address this differently. Can you speak at all to what some of the ancillary industries that you've seen are looking at communities as they develop these ordinances? Are you having to, help them design a land use program that, not only looks at the, manufacturing and perhaps distribution component of it, but the research and development and maybe product testing and kind of those ancillary uses? I understand that this is outside of your wheelhouse necessarily as counsel to these cities, but given your expertise in this subject matter, I just thought I'd ask the question.
I think if I understand your question, yes. For instance, in the context if you go into manufacturing, our ordinance has a significant amount of material related to what that laboratory has to look like, and we pretty much dictated what that was based on dealing with our discussions with industrial hygienists, type of individuals who design these kinds of laboratories for industries like this. So we sat down at great length and talked to them about, okay, what does a level 2 laboratory that uses butane look like? As many of you may know, what the DOJ in California has to deal with for the most part are BHOs. They're essentially butane honey oil labs that are in people's garages and houses where they blow their house up because they don't know what you're doing.
Sure.
For the most part, the design of those laboratories we created with the use of experts to make sure that when we adopted this, it was going to be safe, not only for the employees that work in those buildings, but for the adjacent property owners. But for the most part, we looked at it from an industry safety perspective. We looked at it from traffic. We looked at it from the fact that there are, this is a cash business right at the moment. So one of the issues that you will find is that most of these businesses have huge amounts of cash on site. Los Angeles and Southern California has experienced strong arm robberies. People walk in. Los Angeles had adopted an ordinance that required guards, armed guards. Well, they're the first ones to get shot, and then they go in and they take essentially the amount of cash. When we closed down in one of my agencies a number of dispensaries, the typical average amount of cash was about $300,000 to $350,000 in the back room. So that creates, and as long as it remains a cash business, and as long as the feds don't, jump on board and start establishing some policies about what these businesses are going to do with this, including you, there are going to be huge amounts of cash that are attractive for people like the cartel. It's an easy way to make money.
And then last question, really quickly. Do any of your cities go into detail as far as how these facilities treat waste products or excess plants? Or
yes, they have to have. Our ordinance requires them to come to present with their applications a significant number of plans, and one of them is a hazardous waste disposal plan. Because especially if you go into level 2, where they treat the product with volatile solvents. They essentially become hazardous waste, and you can't put them down the sewer, and you can't throw them into the... So what we require as part of our plans is how they store it, what they do with it, how their employees are exposed to it, the fact that they're going to have to hire special waste management people that handle just those kinds of products to pick it up, and how frequently they have to pick it up, and so forth. So all of that is all defined before they get a permit.
Thank you. Thanks again, Mr. Hale, and I'm going to be real brief on my questions, and I appreciate your opinion, really I do, and you're bringing both benefits and challenges to start this workshop. So with all due respect, what I'm going to ask for, since I'm really kind of fact-based, is if you have any fact-driven statistics that can answer my questions. First, on the benefit side, when we talk about taxation, and Councilman Oliver brought up taxation, it's going to require a Prop 218 vote. But what are the limitations, if any, for a city council or a city to apply certain tax, certain excise tax or use tax, if you will? And on that, when we're talking about Colorado, it's very vague in the millions or even a billion-dollar industry, but we're talking about a whole state or even nationwide. Is there any parallels to cities that have buildings in the price per square foot? In other words, how much does a building make? Give me a per plant price or a per square foot price or a per employee price, and break it down for me a little bit closer to something that I could make a decision based on versus the entire state has the potential of making X number of dollars. Is there any data that shows?
Yes. I don't know that I have that for you this evening.
If somebody comes into Madera and wants a 50,000 square foot building, X number of plants, that building can generate, if we were to apply a 5% excise tax on top of the 8.25%, we stand to make X number of dollars. That's kind of what I'm driving at.
Yes. And that's where the number came from for Grover Beach. We did that through a consultant that told us that we were looking in the neighborhood of about $1.5 to $2 million in tax revenue. So that wasn't a number we just pulled out of the air. That was a number that we got using...
Those are estimates. That has not been happening.
We're not there yet, so obviously...
And that's what I was asking about Colorado, places that have been there.
Colorado does have specific statistics. I just didn't bring those with me this evening.
Understandable. And on the other side of the coin, those same statistics, when we talk about impaired driving, we talk about our impact to our police department on how we now have to kind of change the way we do business, and we know how to measure alcohol levels, but now we're having to measure THC levels, youth, emergency rooms, kids skipping school, things of that nature. Is there data on that? I mean, like hard-driven data that shows in these communities that have allowed, whether it be storefronts or just manufacturing, that these stats have increased or not?
Yes, the data that I gave you was specifically from that organization was created by the federal government to do exactly what you just are articulating. They accumulated that data and information, and that's how they came up with those stats, and that's the whole purpose of why they were created. We don't have that. We don't have that in any of my agencies that I've represented because we're too new into the business. Okay. Whether that exists elsewhere in California, I would hazard a guess to say yes. I just have never gathered that.
I mean, I get the broad definition that there's going to be an impact. I'm just trying to tailor it a little more to Madera,
right,
to our demographics, to our location in the state of California. Just certain things like that would help me better understand on what we are dealing with versus a broad statewide or nationwide kind of thing, because it's going to fluctuate. It's not going to be the same in Madera that it would be in Fresno, that it would be in Oakland.
It's information that we could get you. I just didn't bring it with me tonight.
Understandable.
I can't answer your question in the context of money that can be made. I mean, again, not in your situation, but in San Francisco, there have been dispensaries that we're aware of the fact have made somewhere in the neighborhood of $50,000 to $60,000 a day.
And so these jobs that some of these guys are paying in cash money, are they high-paying jobs? Are they $20, $25 an hour? Are these minimum wage, I'll pay you $10, $11 an hour to water plants?
It depends on, again, it's made up of an industry that has, varying levels of expertise and education. The people working in your test labs are definitely, people with bachelor's and master's degrees to do this kind of work, to work on a mass spec machine, to do the testing and laboratory analysis that needs to be done. They're not your $12 an hour labor. I can't answer your question in context of what they pay, but the
it-
guy that drives the truck that hauls it down the road
Yeah.
may be close to, to something like
Yeah,
that.
and I understand completely. I just want you to understand where I'm coming from. I'd kind of like a little range of a 50 or 100,000 square foot building, X number of employees, cultivates approximately this much with the generation of this.
Yeah.
That helps me better than potentials and statewide kinds of
And
things.
that data is available. Yeah, I'm
Okay.
sure we could get that.
Okay, we can chat after. Councilman Rodriguez, you have something more to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify when you said Prop 218, and when it comes to, for example, a building, and I think Councilman Oliver and Mayor Medillin touched on that. When you have a building, and instead of trying to tax on gross receipts, because I think you brought up a really good point earlier that anyone can bring, or you use the verdant version, where they can bring in product from somewhere, kind of similar to like moonshine, right? You bring it down, you try to sell it, and you don't really report it as your gross receipts because it's a cash business. But if the city decided to use something more in the favor of taxing per square foot, would that then have to go to the people for a vote?
Yes.
Okay.
We did that, in fact, in King City. The tax was based on a per square foot basis in the context of the license itself. In other words, if we issued a 3A license, which is indoor medium growth at 22,000 square feet of canopy, they got essentially taxed on a per square foot basis, and we didn't care how much they grew. If they grew 1,000 square feet, they were still taxed on 22,000 square feet. So it's essentially an excise tax, even though it's based on square foot.
And the reason why I say that is because I think just in looking at what kind of business Madera would, if they ever decided, you'd want to look at viable business, big players, people that have a reputable business and have integrity and trying to promote good business in the city of whether it be Madera or any other city. I understand that there's lots of challenges, and there's challenges now because of the legalization of marijuana. But on the horizon, I see manufacturing. I see jobs. I see revenues, especially in the midst right now where the city council, or not necessarily the city, but we've increased our certain rates. There's fees. There's inspection, rental ordinances. Water rates are going up. We can't really fee ourselves out of this particular crisis that we find ourselves, especially with unfunded liability, pension and all. We have to find ways of creating revenue. And I've always been a believer that, although there's challenges, then we as a city have to find solutions to go around those. Not necessarily to create more challenges. The challenges are present no matter what. We have to accept the fact that it's illegal. The next step that we have to do is how can we bring a legal entity, a legit entity, to be able to produce the type of revenue that you mentioned earlier, especially with that city that you deal with. I do believe that the revenues are there, and I believe this is a good opportunity for Madera to, continue to have these workshops and get as much information as we can to make really good decisions. I want to thank you for the information you shared with us. I know that towards the end of the staff report, there was quite a few challenges that I've seen there based on what's happening in Colorado. And further research, that I did myself, I know that the organization that provided those statistics is mainly pro-prohibition. They don't really want it, and obviously, why would you? This is something that's been, for decades now, almost a century, that's been banned for quite some time and as a Schedule I. But nevertheless, that's already done. It's here. It's legal. How can we move forward to possibly help our community that I believe could be in dire situation if we don't economically grow with some type of revenues, whether it be a casino, whether it be a commercial-based type of operation, or any type of industry. These are... I guess these are ideas that, or not ideas, but rather operations that we need to visit. Whether challenges present themselves or not, we have to be able to tackle them in an orderly fashion. So I do appreciate everything that you've discussed here with us, and I don't know that if my colleagues have any other questions, but thank you again for your presentation, Mr. Hale.
You bet.
Yeah, good point, Councilman Rodriguez. That's exactly why we're here, and this is one of 3 workshops. So I'll ask if there are any other questions of Mr. Hale.
No.
David, thank you very
I do have one last question. I'm sorry. With the property values that are gone up, how has that impacted your city as far as assessed value?
It's a very positive impact to the city because obviously your property tax will ultimately go up with an increase in the value and the sales accordingly. So that's essentially another benefit that it can bring to you in the context of property tax revenues. But again, you know, the thing that I've seen is that you will see these kinds of benefits, financial benefits, at the same time as electeds, having worked for electeds for 25 years. I know that they're always sensitive to their constituents, and you will have those kinds of issues. I'm just letting you know that you expect it because they come to me and tell me how many calls they get. So it's like I said, there's pros and cons. You'll definitely see benefits. You have an industry, a strong industry that's coming into your community. It's going to increase your property values. It's going to increase, you know, your tax revenues. But at the same time, you have a whole room I've seen full of very angry people, you know, who don't want to see this. So there's 2 sides to it.
And I'm sorry, you know, in your cities, have you allowed for both a dispensary, or the ordinances are for both dispensary and or commercial use?
Well, we've allowed, in the city of River Beach, they allowed essentially everything for medical marijuana. They did not allow recreational use. In the King City, they allowed only cultivation, period, nothing else. They didn't allow dispensaries or anything else. Any harvested product had to be shipped out of the city, but they did allow, because they're an ag-based community. So there were a lot of farmers that wanted to take advantage of it, and you know that's their bread and butter. So that's what essentially they allowed, but nothing else. So I would say probably Grover Beach is the one that has accepted most of this kind of use, with the exception commercial use.
Thank you, and that should conclude my questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hale. We really appreciate your presentation. And if my colleagues don't mind, I think I'd like to take just a quick 3-minute recess.
What's that? That's fascinating. Wow, I think it is going to be fascinating.
Thank you, everybody. If we could reconvene, I would appreciate it. We will. My favorite. We will now move on to our consent calendar. If there's any council member wishing to pull a particular item for any further discussion or question, Councilman Rigby.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to pull item B4, please.
Item B4. Councilman Rodriguez.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to pull item B11.
B11. Anyone else? Mayor Pro Tem.
I'd like to pull B5 and B9.
B5 and B9. Anyone else? Seeing none, I will ask for a motion to approve consent items excluding item B4, B5, B9, and B11.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to approve.
Second.
It's been properly moved and seconded to approve the consent item excluding item B4, B5, B9, and B11. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Councilman Rigby, item B4.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Missy, some time ago when we were going through our budget exercises over the summer, this item had come up as a, just sort of through passing as we were sort of looking at different ways we might be able to bridge the gap of our hole, if you will. The FMAA is a partner that we've been working with for several years now. I do kind of want just a quick reminder of our adult daycare, some of the things that we've been doing through that. How many people do we serve through our ADC program here in the city of Madera?
Through the mayor, thank you for your question. Charles Rigby, councilman. The current attendance is there are 9 enrolled. I think I gave a number of 10 or 11 earlier in June, and there are presently 9, about 4 of which come daily. The remaining 5 come either 2 or 3 days per week.
Is that sporadic? It's kind of ebb and flow. When you say 4 come 2 to 3 days a week, you might see them for 1 day of the week. The next week you might see them for 3.
That's correct. Some families handle it different. It's respite care, so it could be a situation where a family member needs to go to town for something or to have a doctor's appointment and they need, a couple of hours, or it could be a scheduled. It really depends on each of the individual client's needs.
Are the resources that we're receiving from the FMAAA, are these resources that are diminishing over the years? Is this something that we see that is going to be sustainable for years to come? When we go in, do we sort of receive the same amount of help from them as far as resource?
So there are 3 different contracts under this item, and we're referring to the ADC contract. The value is a little north of $33,000 a year. It's been approximately that for the last 5 years. The challenge with that is that other forms of revenue from other grant agencies have evaporated. Also, we've seen a pretty steady decline in revenue from the daily donations, which are voluntary from the participants themselves. So the revenues have dropped. The total revenues have dropped. While FMAAA's may have been static, the total revenues have dropped.
And so if total revenues drop, Ms. C., does that mean that that's more money that's coming out of the general fund?
Yes, sir. The increase on the general fund the burden on the general fund has been steadily increasing.
Okay. And then really quick, how many municipalities that are partnered with the FMAAA offer ADC care or offer what we offer as a municipality?
None that I'm aware of. None in Madera County. I don't believe any do in Fresno as well.
We're the only one.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Mayor Pro Tem Gallegos.
Marianne, I'm looking at your personal budget details.
This program costs $98,000 to run. Am I correct?
I didn't refresh
Okay,
that
so
number, but
it says FMAAA is 33, donations 15, and then matching funds are 50, and that's our general fund, correct?
correct.
So, and then I look to the right, and I see that we have six program leaders who run this facility, and their salaries range into $68,000 combined. And is that correct?
Salaries and benefits combined.
Okay.
There's a portion of the full-time coordinator who oversees that embedded in the salary numbers. The part-time salaries are I don't have the number off the top of my head. I'm
Right.
sorry, but in the exercise we went through in June, where I backed out all the revenue that the city gets for this program and explained what an annual net savings to the general fund would look like. The balance was about $70,000 a year.
Okay. So I'm on board with Councilman Rigby about kind of filling in the gaps. So we're looking at, we serve 9 enrolled for daily, not to put a price on anything, for $98,000 a year.
That's correct.
Okay.
Any other questions regarding this particular item? Seeing none, I will.
Mr. Mayor, I move to approve item B4 as presented.
Second.
It's been properly moved and seconded to approve item B4. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Nay.
Do we need a roll call vote? I have one nay vote.
Yes, we do. Thank you, Mayor. Okay, beginning with Councilmember Hawley.
Yes.
Councilmember Rodriguez.
Yes.
Councilmember Oliver.
Yes.
Councilmember Rigby.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Gallegos.
Nay.
Councilmember Robinson.
Yes.
And Mayor Medellin.
Aye.
Motion passes 6-1.
Thank you very much for that, Sonia. Appreciate it. Moving on to Mayor Pro Tem, Councilman Rodriguez wanted to pull item B11.
Are we going down the line? Or?
Whoever asked first.
Yeah. All right, I'm sorry. Yes, thank you, Mayor Medellin. I did have a question in regards to the gearboxes. So it looks like 3 of the ditches all contain 2 of these boxes, right? And at the time that we removed those 3, I'm assuming one for each ditch?
No, there's one ditch completely down and a half a ditch is sort of partially functioning.
Okay, so maybe you can help me because I haven't seen your water treatment plan here. So you have 3 ditches. Each ditch has 2 of these gearboxes, right? And that's
Correct.
what keeps the aeration. So when you pulled out these 3 for rebuild or for what have you, was it one from each ditch, or did you not operate one ditch at a, what was the?
I didn't do it personally, so I'm only giving you secondhand information. But we sometimes have moved gearboxes and motors to try to get the best match. But when we took all 3 down, we wanted to keep as much capacity, so we kept one ditch with 2 gearboxes, full aeration. The second ditch has only 1 gearbox, so we can only run half the flow to maintain the adequate aeration.
Okay, and at that time, was that not discovered that maybe that, I mean, the only reason why I'm saying is because this is an emergency situation, so, and, you know, I don't know, I'm visually just trying to imagine what it looks like. I did some research there and I looked at some of them, but I'm assuming that when you're running at that capacity, then that should somehow, you know, warn us that, you know, this could be possibly failing, and for us to have to wait until we have a failure when at that time you're removing 3 of those boxes, and I would have thought that at that point that would constitute an emergency versus having to come here now and request an emergency. I guess what I'm trying to get at is that the cost, based on the staff report, is going to cost us more for trying to get something now versus having to plan that at an earlier time.
You're correct. Emergencies are much more expensive to implement. The first two that went down just totally failed, so they had to be replaced, and the other one was showing signs of failure, so all three were sent out to be rebuilt.
But it looks like now they're out for a prolonged period of time, obviously,
Right.
and, okay. Well, nevertheless, the reason why I bring that up is because obviously that cost now is somehow going to be computed into the actual rates at some point. I know at this point, our 5-year deal, these rates are built in to increase, but in the future, when we have these types of costs, that's what's going to be implemented in the new rates when we visit those again. And I'm for trying to, save as much as we can so that we don't have that impact in our residents of Madera. So, maybe planning something like that happens, I would ask that we jump into that at that moment so that we don't have to pay a higher ticket price for items that we can purchase at the time of failure or when we remove that. And that was it. I just wanted to make a comment, and also wanted to ask if each of those ditches has right now one gearbox operating. You said only one of them does?
There's 2 operating ditches out of the 3 ditches.
Okay.
One just doesn't run as can't handle as much flow.
Okay. Thank you, Dave.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Mr. Randall, my question is, how much does it cost for a new gearbox?
New gearboxes are around $45,000 to $50,000.
And we're asking for $166,000 to replace 2 new gearboxes, or used?
They're used.
They're used. And we have a warranty on those used gearboxes?
They are. They've been inspected and warranted. Yes.
For how long?
I don't have the specifics. I think they're 8 years, but I couldn't tell you without going back and looking at the numbers.
Okay, because that's a concern. If we're going to purchase used gearboxes, we would kind of need to know a warranty. And to get the new gearboxes, I'm hearing it's a 6 months out to get them to us.
It's more like 8 to 10.
Okay.
Yes.
In the report, it said that these gearboxes were, we had 3 gearboxes down for 10 months.
No, they're down. They will be down for 10 months. They weren't down for 10 months.
Okay, they will be down for 10 months, and that will no longer have a backup. Did it just happen all at once, or did we see this coming and we didn't really look towards the future to kind of make a change before we got to this point?
We did some analysis. Previously, we had some people go through and do a full analysis of all our equipment to try to identify where we might have some potential risk. And this was one of the areas where they said we needed to look a little harder. So it's within the scope of what we've contracted them to take a look at and improve the situation. We started seeing some signs of failure. They're not all at the same age, but a lot of them are, and they're getting near their useful life. So it's sort of one of those planned things. So the norm would be to have them rebuilt, to send them out to have new bearings and bushings put in, and that's what we did. Is we took the 2 that had failed and the one that was showing like it was going to fail and sent it out to be rebuilt. Unfortunately, while it was out to be rebuilt, the other ones are starting to show similar stress issues, and the ones that should have been a quick fix and a rebuild, relatively, cannot be rebuilt. They need major components that have to be replaced, which takes just as long and is more expensive than just replacing them. So we're going ahead with those replacements, but that redundancy that we have in all the elements of the plant now is sort of puts us at risk because it just is taking longer than you normally would see. So we sort of have a little bit of a perfect storm happening. We're doing our preventative repairs, and that's taking longer than normal, and we're having other failures, which, and while they haven't failed yet, it's just a total failure would be even very, very difficult to deal with, huge expense, and we could look at fines and other problems that we don't want to be in. It's just too essential to take that chance.
Okay, and $166,000 is going to impact our general fund, correct?
No, that says no impact on the general fund.
It won't impact.
It's
So the money is coming
enterprise.
from an emergency fund, Mr. Tooley?
Enterprise.
Through the chair, council member, our enterprise funds carry fund balances just like the general fund, so this will come from your sewer fund balance position.
Okay. So I have a proposal. I don't know if this is something we can think about, Mr. Randall. Because the warranty on these gearboxes is only for 1 year. And I did some research. So my proposal is to purchase one used gearbox, which is almost $80,000 for a used one, and put a purchase order for 2 new ones, which will cost the price of one used, because we'll have to replace 3 gearboxes. And it would save the city money, and we'd be getting 2 new gearbox products instead of 2 used, and still have to purchase a third. And that would be an additional $50,000 on top of the $166,000. Does that make sense? Did everybody get that?
It makes sense. My question would be, a used one, refurbished, what is the longevity, what is the warranty on that one versus...
1 year.
No, but I mean, when we put it to use, are we going to get the same amount of time out of that one in use as we would a new one?
The information we have is that these are slightly used, whatever that really means, and they have been reviewed and they should be in good condition. The typical gearbox that we use has about an 8 to 10 year life on it. Okay. This is a different
with a brand new one.
With a brand new one. This is a different type of gearbox. It's from a different manufacturer. It has to be altered slightly so we can use it. It's the only other gearbox that they could find that could be made to work with our system. It is supposedly a little more robust, but I'm not an expert and I couldn't tell you that. We're using the consulting engineer, Stantec, who is providing us this information. So we should expect a reasonable life. It's not nearly as cost effective, obviously, if we could wait. The reason we're entertaining this is that with 2 gearboxes, we will not have enough capacity to maintain the plant flows. We need at least 3. 1 gearbox goes down, we're in trouble. So that's why we were looking at the 2. The third one makes us worry too, and as soon as the other things are fixed, that will probably be sent out to be refurbished, and if it's found it can't be refurbished, it will be replaced. It's just a question of risk. We may be fine the whole time, but the consequences of the failure is fairly significant and severe. We will violate our discharge permits potentially. We could have to spend very large amounts of money to try to do aeration with some other external mechanism. We've been asking the engineers to look at those potentialities should we have that happen to us, and they're having a hard time coming up with systems that we really could sort of bootstrap something if we had to. So we're trying to take a position that doesn't give us too much exposure. We realize it is an increased cost. There's no question about that.
And I certainly agree, Mayor Pro Tem, with what you're saying, but it's the risk that I'm concerned about. I'm trying to minimize that risk and trying to put a price on it. And it's really kind of a crystal ball thing, so I understand completely. Can you tell me, Dave, any other impacts to wastewater treatment, whether it be energy costs, manpower, any other effects from...
You're going to have some just, having to babysit the system, manpower and things like that, which aren't going to be, in the scale of things, aren't that as large. Okay. However, the potential health risk of a spill of sewage and other types of issues is difficult. The plant only has enough capacity if we have to drop, if the plant stops working, to hold reserve flows in our emergency pond for 1 day. So if we can't get the plant back up and running within that day, then we have problems that the discharge either isn't going to be the quality that's required for a discharge permit, which we end up getting fines for, and we can obviously impact the environment, et cetera, or if we can't get it through the plant, it can cause other problems in the system.
So my question is, we've had 2 gearboxes sitting on a pallet for several months. How come we've been sitting on that?
two out there, I believe, are old ones that can't be used, but I'd have to go out and tell you more. I think those are ones that are basically being scrapped.
They are now, but we've had them knowing that we've had to replace, but we haven't done anything, and here we are now at an emergency level having to pay out. $30,000 of the $166,000 is going towards to tweak the gearboxes to match our system. That's part of where that money is going.
They just don't fit.
Yes.
And that was going to be my question, is to follow up on that is, what would be the cost, additional cost to retrofit, modify, so that we can make these work? Because at this point, $166,000, is that just for the gearboxes plus the labor that it would cost to bring that back to?
The 166 includes the gearboxes, the installation labor, and a contingency in case there's some fix we got to do.
Where Mayor Pro Tem had mentioned the $30,000, that would be for the modifying of the gearboxes. Did I hear that correctly, Mayor Pro Tem?
Yes.
Is that correct, David?
$29,000 and some change.
I'd have to look into the individual bid. I don't have that in front of me.
Well, with the severity of what could possibly happen, I agree with my colleagues. We can't turn back time, but I am going to ask the question, how do we get here in the first place? If we have the potential of having that great a problem in the city, then I do think that we need to cover ourselves and make sure that it doesn't even happen that way. If this is something that is 8 to 10 months out for something new, something tells me that we can't call somebody overnight to get this fixed, if we need to.
Mayor Medillin, I would like to suggest to Mr. Tooley, if possible, that I spent several hours out at the wastewater treatment plant, that maybe we could have the supervisor or manager come out and do a workshop for my colleagues and myself to see what's happening out there. That is really important. That's like one of our lifelines on top of water. It's something that we probably don't know a lot out of. It's like kind of mid-valley disposal. It's not a glamorous thing to want to be a part of, but it's something that we need in our city.
Through the chair, council member, let me offer an alternative. I think it would be more effective for the council to actually go to the plant. In addition to having the plant operator, who certainly owns a lot of the responsibility out there, why don't we have our external engineer come out as well? And that way you'll have the fullest review of the operation of the plant and the challenges that the city faces.
I was just thinking workshop because then they have to do it quite a few times. And
if we could get the council together, and again, it's a suggestion, and I will yield to the collective will of the council, but there is no substitute for the real-time experience until you go out and understand the flow process of an aerobic plant. It's one thing to see it on paper. It's another to walk down the system and understand how the pieces fit together.
Yeah, very good point. I would agree.
Yeah, and I would agree because the only images that I've seen are virtual, so if I'd seen the real thing, I think that would be very helpful. And again, just kind of going back to what my colleagues had said, what puts us in this place, and again, with rates going up with water, I can't imagine that at some point or another, costs like these will have to be formulated in the new rate increase that we bring up in the next 5 years, that'll be on for the next 5 years, then you'll have to factor that in there. So if this is a big issue right now for a lot of the residents, I know some don't understand how these rates are calculated and factored in, but obviously when there's costs like these, especially emergencies, that only increases that. So.
Through the chair, council member, I think there's some questions that we should objectively ask and answer of ourselves. The plant is constructed with redundant systems. Part of the one half of the gearboxes went down. We addressed those appropriately. One of the questions we should ask and answer ourselves is why that portion of the redundancy that was still in place failed so close, is beginning to be a basis of concern so close in time. If we don't ask and answer those questions, we're not good managers and we're not good leaders.
Agreed.
Right, and that's kind of why I looked at it as a business person, that we're going to spend a lot of money for something that is used, that could go down like everybody's vehicle. It's a warranty for 10,000 miles or 100,000, and it seems like once you hit that 100,000, 5,000 miles, your car, something major happens to it, and you're out of warranty, but you've paid all these years. So I feel we're going to buy used gearboxes, and once that year's up, boom, we're having to put out some more money because we didn't purchase new.
Might I add that you're running on 3 pistons? You're running on 3 pistons.
3
Your new
pistons.
car.
Yeah.
If I may, Mr. Mayor.
Of course, Councilman.
You guys talk about this plant. Have you been out there? I've been there and smelt it.
Yeah.
I don't want to see it again. I feel that whatever we need to do to fix, you know what I'm saying? That's not a place you want to go and walk around for an hour and a half to find out if the gearbox is going to work or not. I trust that they didn't bring this to our attention if we didn't need it. And I understand we got some used ones or some new ones. I've seen new ones go out, and they still, once they go out, they're out, whether you got a warranty on them or not. So I think we're here today to find out what we want to do going forward to get this here so we don't have to be seeing something come up in our toilets that we don't need.
Right.
So that's what I'm thinking that it's about. I didn't like the $166,000, but now listening to it, where do we go from here?
If we had purchased one use, we'd run on 4. And if we had the plant manager is not in attendance, so if there's somehow we could postpone it to see if our facility could run on 4, while we purchased 2 brand new ones, that would be my suggestion.
Well, we have an emergency being declared here, so again, I'm going to defer to our director, but something tells me time is of the essence here. This isn't something that we can bring back.
It is, time is of the essence. It's just a matter of risk. The longer we take to address it, the longer we are exposed to the risk.
And that's a price tag that I always weigh, that it's not always about cost savings. It's about efficiency, and it's about minimizing risk. Right. And that comes with a price.
And if I may, Mr. Mayor, I'm sorry, but at this time we are at risk.
Right.
But we have to ask ourselves what put us at that risk. So what we're trying to, I think what I'm trying to clear, the message that I'm trying to get is that let's not be in that risky situation, because again, it's a lot of cost. I agree with my colleagues here that this is not a position that I would want to be put into, or an emergency. I mean, I understand emergencies, but this is something that could have been prevented way before. We could have seen this coming. Hey, you know what? We're running on 3 gearboxes. Let's just order 2, because I know that, just like what you said, that if we don't have that, we have that failure, then boom, we're going to run into these problems, and here are all these additional costs that can happen. At that point, that would have been a decision that we could have made at the time and purchased those gearboxes, and I don't think we'd be in this situation now.
Mr. Mayor, let me be a little argumentative. If we purchase 2 additional gearboxes and keep them on the shelf, they might sit on the shelf for 10 years, and at a point in time, they become no longer an effective replacement. This is a cost versus benefit kind of exercise. So let me suggest that you divide your thought process into 2 parts. The first is you need to make a decision with regard to the recommendation made by staff and the alternative presented by Councilmember Gallegos. Second part of it is that we need to take a critical look, and this is something that we've already talked about with council and that we absolutely know we have to do. So we have to take a critical look at the operation of the plant, all parts of the operation of the plant. That's why we have an external consultant coming in and making an independent review. That's why in your last budget you approved funds for now I've lost my thought process. You provided funds for additional individuals to perform preventative maintenance and to have a preventative maintenance manual written for this plant based on the specific components of this plant. So you have my assertion as your city administrator that that process is going to take place. We're going to take a critical look, and we're going to ask and answer the questions that we should as good managers and good leaders. The balance of the discussion this evening should be yours about how you want to address the recommendation made. With
Mayor.
that, Mr. Mayor, I'll yield the microphone.
Thank you, Mr. Tully. Mayor Pro Tem?
So the question is, we've had 2 gearboxes sitting on a pallet for almost 6 months. So we've been running on 4. Is that correct? Until this last one just went down?
I couldn't tell you the exact timing. I had to come
Okay,
back
so
and
if that
check
was
with
the case, then if we bought 1 used, we'd be running on 4 again and waiting for 2 new ones to come. That would be my question.
The 2 that are in question, you said, I thought those were scrap. Those were unusable.
Yes,
Is that what you
but
said?
we've had them not working for over almost 6 months.
Councilman Robinson, you have a question.
Yes, I was saying that, they noticed the vibration in the gearbox, that because of the metal that's in the system, just like you driving a car, you run over a nail, and then pop, then you have to replace it. Problem comes up, and it has to be done. It's an accident, and you have to take care of it. There's no delay. If you're caught on the freeway, it's an emergency.
Yeah, but if you buy a used tire, it's going to pop sooner than a new one. If you patch it.
Explain to us again, Mr. Randall, your methodology and your recommendation, please.
In terms of the current situation with the gearboxes, the proposal is to purchase 2 used gearboxes. They are the only thing that we can find available to replace the existing ones. Unfortunately, it's the only thing we can do in an expedient manner. Okay.
And how much time is that to get those up and running?
And we're hoping it's a 3 to 4 week time. We're at the mercy of the supplier saying that he's going to provide us and install. While we have a very small labor component that we help with, it's really mainly upon them completing the process, delivering them, doing the modifications, and putting it in. But we've been asking them to expedite it. We've asked them, they've sort of preloaded this, awaiting final approvals of what we're asking for this evening. And it just is as quick as we can get it, because every time whenever we're waiting, it's just that much more risk. We also are currently monitoring them, obviously, a lot more closer. We have an increased frequency of changing lubricants, et cetera, and testing. Basically, like any other time you think you're having a problem with something, you try to baby it to the best degree you can and pay the best attention you can until you can get it to the place where you can fully correct the problem.
And the existing boxes that are working, in your opinion, those are just fine, doing the best they can for now? Or are these about the same amount of time as the other ones, and at any moment?
I'm not the expert. I can't tell you other than our consulting engineer has identified it as an emergency, something we should not wait on and we need to take care of. It's something that is critical, could become critical, but currently right now we're able to operate effectively. We're meeting all our discharge requirements, et cetera. But if we lose one of them, then we have a problem that we have to try to find some way to address it. Will be a lot more expensive, and we're not as yet found a really good way to address that.
And so in understanding, Mayor Pro Tem, what you're saying is 8 to 10 months, but you're saying why buy used when we can buy new and get some better longevity out of it, something that we can have more confidence with. But the risk is we wait the 3 to 4 weeks plus to get it installed and tested and everything. That's a much shorter time than waiting.
It would be
8
less.
to 10 months.
It would be less 8 to 10 months. It's usually a 6 month, but in the city, I'm hearing it takes a while to get a purchase order, almost a month.
Well, that can certainly be expedited. I mean, we're in a state of emergency here.
Yeah,
but
so it would be it's almost like a 6 month.
Yeah.
Okay. And so you, again, Mayor Pro Tem, now I'd like you to tell us your proposal, what you're asking.
My proposal is to buy 1 used and then purchase 2 brand new, which is the price for 1 used. We'd have all 6 online within 6 months.
Mr. Mayor, may I ask a leading question?
Of course.
The replacement units that you found, are they readily available or are they in short supply?
They're the only ones they found. We were looking for more, and these are the only 2 we found.
Okay, so that kind of takes, I was going to suggest something, but if they're in short supply, I can't get there.
Yeah.
And they're coming from Utah.
Yes.
Just for clarity, I think the council understands that, but I've heard enough numbers thrown around that I'm losing track. So just what we have at the plant running right now are 3 gearboxes. 2 of those 3 that are running are the ones where the vibrations are occurring, and we feel like there's a threat of them not performing. So the 2 of the 3 that are currently keeping us alive are the ones that are shaky and threatening to fail. Those are the 2 we'd like to replace. So if those 2 fail and we only have the one used one, then that would give us 2 that are operating, and Mr. Randall has described that 2 is not enough.
So we're only operating with 3 gearboxes this whole time?
We've been operating for 3 since we took the first 3 and which were
Sent
already
them out to be refurbished or
and
fixed or
pulled them
whatever.
out, and we thought we're getting them repaired, and now we're probably going to end up getting them replaced.
And when did those 3 come out? The 2 have been out for a while.
I'd have to go back and find the dates from the manager. I don't know the specific.
And I was told the ones that we pulled out were the ones that were rattling and the bearings were making noises.
Well, the first 3 of the 6 came
yes.
out the previous fiscal year in 16-17. So they've been out for, we know at least a few months. How long before that, I'm not sure. But again, the question is, at this point, we've got 3 in place. 2 of those are shaky. Those are the 2 that we want to get replaced on an emergency basis, because we're in a bad place if even one of those 3 goes down and we can't replace it very
So if
quickly.
we have 2 that are shaking, and that's why we're here at an emergency, why aren't we at an emergency with the other 3 that have not been replaced? That's the part I don't get, because we really should be running 6 gearboxes right now.
Preferably 6, but
we could run on 4.
But we can run on 3. We're running on 3
yeah.
now. So that's what we've kind of been describing, that when we have 6 gearboxes in place, you can't pull all 6 out at one time.
Right.
Even if you wanted to, you've got to sort of phase them in, phase the replacements in as you can. So the 3 that were broken, let's just call it broken, those came out, got sent out for replacement. We were fine operating on the 3 until we weren't, or until we started to fear that we weren't. That's where we are now, and we're simply scratching and clawing for a solution, so that if any one of those last 3 goes out, we have something to pop. Well, preferably, we'll pop it in before it completely fails on us. But we're not unlike council or any of the ratepayers that would rather not go through emergency processes, but they do happen. This may feel awkward for you as a council, but in terms of your staff's ability to work with the consultant to find a quick replacement is I think, pretty good service. We're absolutely working to get the best handle on our plant and its maintenance requirements so that we can minimize the surprises that we have. But this is a city with lots of moving pieces, and I don't think there's anybody that can promise that things won't break and we won't get surprises and have emergency purchases. So,
Councilman Oliver.
Thank you for that additional information, Dave, and Councilmember Gallegos. I think you've raised some really excellent points and questions, and quite frankly, I would have liked to have been exposed to some of that communication and correspondence and some of the homework and findings that you're able to receive. I do like Mr. Toy's idea about convening a council, I wouldn't say meeting, but visitation out at the facility there. It's been since 2015 since I've had an opportunity to see it, so I think it would present a great opportunity. I think with the information that's been prepared, both in the staff report and the questions and answers that have happened here this evening, I think I'm at a comfort level to move forward with the consent calendar item as presented, and in large part I'd like to plan for emergency today, then prepare for a crisis later on, especially based on what's been shared. So that would be my recommendation personally, open to any other thoughts or ideas. And again, Councilmember Gallegos, I appreciate your questioning and points, as they're excellent.
I agree. Thank you for that. Mayor Pro Tem.
So, Mr. Randall, for my information, I just want to clarify, the 3 we have online right now, I did not get the information that they were shaking and rattling.
Mm-hmm.
Is that correct? That they are shaking and rattling?
That's the report I've received, yes.
2 and 3.
Yeah.
I second.
I'm sorry. I don't know if they're The engineer says they have a problem. I'm not sure if that came from the oil analysis or from a vibration study. Again, it's not my expertise. I don't do that, but we have the engineer telling us that those are at risk. I think it was principally based upon the oil analysis that they looked at. Matter of fact, they started doing the oil analysis, and before they even sent it out, they said it's not worth doing the diagnostics. It's just way over the top. They can see the particulates. You need to take care of this ASAP.
There's certainly a lot to be learned here, I think, in this particular exercise and how we got to this point. I usually don't look backwards, I look forwards, and we can certainly sit up here and look backwards, and hindsight is 20/20. And again, that may be an exercise in the future that we address. And Mayor Pro Tem, I certainly agree. If I can get 3 for the price of 2, I appreciate your direction with our ratepayer in mind and trying to be the most efficient. And normally I would totally agree with that. In this particular case, though, 1 month versus 6 months or longer, I think is way too risky. And we do reach that point to where it's going to cost us a whole lot more than $166,000. So I would agree with Councilman Oliver's recommendation. But before we move on with that motion, Councilman Rodriguez has something to add.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I just wanted to get clarity here. So did Councilwoman Gallegos propose, or was that a motion?
It was a recommendation, and I believe I have a motion right now from Councilman Oliver on the floor.
Want to make sure.
Any more discussion? That was a motion. That's the way I understood it, Councilman Oliver?
Yes, my intent was to make a motion for item B11.
Okay, I just wanted to be clear.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve item B11 as presented. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Hawley?
Yes.
Councilmember Rodriguez?
No.
Councilmember Oliver?
Yes.
Councilmember Rigby?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Gallegos?
No.
Councilmember Robinson?
Yes.
And Mayor Medellin.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-2.
Thank you so much for that, Sonia. And thank you for all that input. Moving along, Mayor Pro Tem, you have 2 particular items on consent, item B5 and B9.
I just wanted to commend our transit department. I know they had a lot of bids for our contractor, and they chose to choose one from Madera. So I would like to commend that, and I wanted to go on record saying thank you for choosing a local business.
Which is Boyle Electric,
Yes.
which is here in our audience. So thank you so much for your, how many years of service here in Madera? 97 years providing service to Madera and the Central Valley and abroad, I would imagine.
And his father was a former mayor and city council himself.
That's correct. Absolutely. Duly noted, Mayor Pro Tem, and I think that's great to recognize that we use local businesses here at the City of Madera. Motion?
Oh, move to approve.
Second.
It's been properly moved and seconded to approve item B5 as presented. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Mayor Pro Tem, item B9.
This is another one I would also like to commend our staff on working with Madera Unified to do some great things for our children here in the city. Partnering with Madera Unified is a great thing, and the proposal that was drawn up between the 2 agencies was very well put together and impressive. So again, kudos to our staff and Madera Unified for trying to make a difference in our children in the city.
Well taken. Thank you, President.
I move to approve.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve item B9 as presented. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Moving on to written communications, a presentation by California Consulting on grant writing services.
Good evening, members of the Madera City Council. And my name is Tristan Champ, and I am the statewide grant manager for California Consulting. where I oversee the grant writing operations of the company statewide. So I supervise a staff of some 20 grant writers, and what I'm here to do tonight is to give you a brief overview of what our company does and what its services are. And so I'm just going to kind of follow along. I have a PowerPoint presentation set up, and I'm just going to kind of run through that. I'll try not to take too much time because, anyways, here we go. So California Consulting, we were founded in 2004, and we've built a solid reputation with a commitment to success for our clients. We are focused solely on assisting our clientele within California. We do not work outside of the state. We are the largest grant writing firm within the state of California. And since 2004, we've really developed a significant expertise in representing cities. We've secured over $1.5 billion for our clients since inception, with over $180 million in grants alone. We have over 20 experienced grant writing professionals. We've researched and obtained funding for more than 750 significant grants and projects. We stay current and up to date on all federal, state, and local, and even private foundation grants. And we built a vast archive of historical knowledge and resources on available grant funding. We are known as experts on locating funds, successfully writing applications, and completing post-award compliance. The key processes with our clients, when we start with our clients, we will do an in-depth needs assessment, and based on that needs assessment, we will then conduct focused grant research based on the specific needs. We will then provide our clients with the current grant opportunities that meet those unique needs and priorities, and then we'll work with our client to create a timeline and schedule to ensure timely submissions. And we write all sections of the grant application and offer a draft and provide final input and edits prior to submission. And just to elaborate a little bit on that, we like to work very closely with our clients, work as a member of their team, and we found that generates the best results in terms of awarded applications. We like to say that we offer superior service. Our grant management team reviews applications prior to submission to ensure a quality project. We monitor the funding agency until the grant awards are announced. We can provide grant administration and post-award compliance. And at least our retainer clients, those are the ones that pay us, hire us on a month-to-month basis. They get monthly reports that reflect grants in progress, grants submitted, and grants awarded. And we will hold at least one, if not more, meetings with that client, either in person or by phone, per month. Talk a little bit about our team. Our team has over 100 years combined specialized experience in public, professional, community, and government sectors. We work with doctorate-level grant research and application expertise. Our founder is Steve Samuelian. And this is a little bit of just our management team. Dan Rodriguez, our operations director, Holly Bachman, our senior director, myself as the grants manager, and I have a deputy grants manager, Danielle Sotelo. A little bit more about our staff. Our founder, Steve Samuelian, has 2 decades of congressional and legislative experience. He was also an elected assemblyman in the 29th district, and he remains active in local state associations. Our operations director, he's responsible for negotiations for contracts and projects, and he has nearly 20 combined years of experience in the nonprofit and human resource fields. Our senior director has 16 years in marketing, PR, and business type activities, and she's also the co-chair of the LA Area Chamber of Commerce's Nonprofit Council. And then my deputy grants manager, she's written over 275 grant applications for cities, counties, and special districts, and she has expertise in political science and government affairs. And then myself, I'm a certified grant writer with over $16 million in awarded grant funding, mostly for public agencies, and I was at one point an adjunct professor at Fresno State. And we like to, I just want to advertise a little bit of our success, again, for municipalities. We got the city of Hermosa Beach a Prop 1 stormwater grant for over $3 million. The city of Upland got a FEMA Staffing for Adequate Fire and Emergency Response grant, or SAFER grant, for nearly $2.5 million. The cities of Linwood and Lompoc, which are both our clients, have received housing-related parks grants for over $800,000. And just to name a few more, the cities of San Fernando, again, one of our clients, got nearly $200,000 in the housing-related parks program for renovation of a park. The city of Patterson got nearly $600,000 in Caltrans ATP funding, and the city of Manteca is actually one of our newest clients, and so we're welcoming them. And again, that's just a little bit about our return on investment. For example, our client in the city of Waterford, they've gotten over $2.74 million in grant awards with a 1,490% return on investment in just 5 years of service with us. And the city of Patterson's gotten over $4.8 million with a 3,493% return on investment. And you can see the others as well. So we've done very well for a number of our clients. And so that's just a little bit of the overview of California Consulting, what we do, and our success in the field of grant writing. And I'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Mr. Shamp, for that presentation. Councilman Rodriguez has a question for you.
Your fee. So how does this work when you grant write for a city such as ours? Would you get a percentage of the award, or is it a consultation fee ongoing?
For the fees, and again, I can't really quote prices because that's not my area of expertise, but I can tell you how our structures sort of work. First of all, we don't take a percentage of the grant award. That's actually illegal to do, and we would be paid from obviously other funds and potentially funds that the city would save through the grant award, but not directly from the grant itself. And a retainer client, they pay us on a monthly basis, and typically, I will quote prices. I know typically that's between $3,000 to $5,000 a month, but don't take that forward. We would negotiate the contract for what would best work for the city. We have clients that hire us on a per grant basis. Say they see a grant that's really important to them, say like Caltrans ATP or Land Water Conservation Fund. They hire us just to write that grant or maybe a handful of grants. And we have very few clients that work with us on an hourly basis, but typically in terms of cost for the level of service and really even ultimately the return on investment, the monthly retainer contract tends to be the best option.
Thank you.
And thank you for sticking around, Mr. Shamp. I know you've been with us for about almost 2.5 hours now, so we really appreciate your patience and we appreciate that informative presentation. Any other questions, Mr. Shamp? Thanks again. Thanks for coming to Madera. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Moving on to item E1, this is review of a permit and processing cost for the building, planning, and engineering departments and direction to staff regarding preparation.
Everybody looks a little bit like they need a caffeine and sugar boost before we start. I should have brought cookies. Maybe we can pull some of Council Gallegos' cookies out of the back.
Yeah.
Sorry, Mayor Pro Tem.
If we get sugar and caffeine, then everyone else needs to get sugar and caffeine. If it's not enough for everybody, then we press on.
My wife just announced that via a text that she had already gone to bed, so my night is free. I can talk really as long as.
Good to know. I got to bring bread and milk.
So this is a review of development service fees in the building, planning, and engineering departments. And I'll make a relatively brief presentation, kind of an introduction, and then you can let me know whether this is something that we want to kind of work through this evening, or we want to bring it back at a later time for some more discussion, or for some more focused discussion, if you choose to. A little bit of background on the fees in general. There was a fee study that was completed by a consultant called Matrix Consulting in 2014. At that point, they prepared a full cost of service evaluation that looked at all of the factors that go into generating permit costs. And they said, here's what it takes for you to process all the kinds of permits that you currently issue. Then the council approved a set of policies that were used to apply to the full cost which actually set fees. And finally, we followed that up with the adoption of a separate fee schedule just about 3 years ago, just a little more than maybe a week plus 3 years. So when I talk about fee recovery policies, probably the biggest policy in question is the question of where recovery targets are set. Recovery targets are in this context, just simply the amount that we try to recover of full cost. So in the example that's on the screen, if the full permit cost of XYZ permit were $1,000 or was $1,000, the council could set a target of anywhere between the full cost, 100% of cost, down to 1 or 0% of cost, anywhere in there up to the maximum cost. So let's say you said we'd like to recover 90% of our cost to process that permit. The actual fee that's set would be $900. So that's basically the process of applying a cost recovery percentage to a full cost. When the council set the policies for fee recovery in 2014, there was a pretty wide range of recovery targets set based on the recommendations and kind of parameters outlined by the consultant at between 60 and 90%. The planning department was down at the lower end of that. That's pretty typical, 60% of a general target. What you have to realize is 60% may be a baseline, but the actual fees were set at everything from 50% for kind of the mom and pop level, lower level entitlements, up to 90 and 100% for the what I might call corporate level, very large projects, subdivisions, and so forth. The building and engineering departments both have targets set at 90% of cost recovery, which is also pretty typical. And the exception in the engineering department is that they have plan check and inspection fees that are based on a percentage of improvement cost. What that actually looks like is, if you look at their fee schedule, kind of the bottom half of this example are fixed fees that are based on a 90% cost recovery. The top handful of fees relate to plan check on civil improvement plans, basically engineering plans, and those are based on a percentage of the cost of the improvements being constructed in a tiered setup. So we charge sort of the right size based on an analysis that was completed. Every year during the budget process, we take a look at the fee schedule and look at the development services side, whether it's time to propose a fee update. There's been no fee update that's actually been presented for your review since 2014. This year, we included a set of assumptions in the budget that some kind of a fee adjustment would occur, and I think we reviewed that with you on concept during the budget discussion. For the planning department, we assumed that the cost factors would be updated to today's cost, and that we would use slightly higher recovery targets. So from a baseline, currently about 60%, up to something more like 75%, although there would still be kind of a range of targets that would make that up. The engineering department, we would update the cost to today's cost for the fixed fee items. The cost recovery target would stay at 90%, and we would just leave the plan check and inspection fees according to that tiered structure. We wouldn't try to address those percentages of billing for plan check and inspection. And in the building department, we did not make any assumptions that there would be a change on building permit fees. I was actually gone during the discussion where the budget was adopted. I missed that meeting. I was out of town. But my understanding is during the discussion, Council expressed some interest in looking at what full cost recovery might look like. Not that you committed to doing so, but to look at how that might work. So in response, we prepared updated calculations for your review, and that was included in your packet. The calculation of full cost, we essentially used the same method that the consultant used in 2014. In fact, we used their spreadsheets. So we updated all of their cost and all of the spreadsheet components to reflect budgeted cost for 2017-18. That includes staff and personnel cost, maintenance and operations cost, and then all the indirect costs that go for things like the city clerk's time and the city attorney's time and so forth that make up our indirect cost allocation plan. And in the materials that we've shown, the full costs are shown. So that's everything's been updated to 17-18. And then all of the fee recovery targets have just been pulled out of that analysis. So what you're saying is today's cost, 100%, no reductions, discounts, or lower recovery targets. So the timing of a fee update, the budget assumes that the limited sort of defined scope for a fee adjustment would be in place for 9 months of the fiscal year. So sometime, you take July, August, and September to do the work. Sometime in early October, that fee adjustment would be in place in order for the budget assumptions to be approximately valid. Obviously, any update would require the adoption of a resolution, so that can't be done this evening. We'd have to bring it back. The resolution can be ready for consideration as early as the next meeting, if you'd like it to be. And the new fees would become effective 30 days after a resolution is adopted. So once you get there and decide that you want to adopt a specific fee schedule, you adopt that resolution, and then 30 days later, the fees become effective. There's really what I would view as an unlimited number of ways that you can do this. You can look at this. I've put forth 4 basic kinds of alternatives. If any of these sound like something you'd like to follow up on, we can do that, or you can craft some custom direction if that suits your interest as well. So very briefly, one thing you could do is you could just take the spreadsheet results that are in front of you in your packet today, roll those into a fee resolution and adopt those at your next meeting. Secondly, you could set fees at 100% of the cost, but then have some kind of a fee incentive program where you just said, hey, look, for the next year or for the next part of this fiscal year, we're going to set those at 100%, but for all the good projects that are ready to go this year, we're going to take off 10, 20, 30, 50%, whatever you think you'd like to do there. The negative side of an incentive or a reduction program is that it doesn't, for the most part, make a meaningful difference on whether projects are feasible or not. I mean, most of our processing fees for any kind of a permit are at most a few $1,000s. And for buildings, even a simple building is going to be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars to construct. For a commercial or industrial building anyway. Houses can be less, obviously. So if an incentive program is something that we're looking at doing as an organization, staff might recommend that you look at the better opportunity as part of our development impact fee update that we're just getting rolling on now with that consultant agreement that you approved at one of your recent meetings. So that process is just rolling, just starting to roll, and maybe it's a little bit better opportunity for an actual incentive program, but certainly you have the option. The third is base fees on current cost, but apply the cost recovery factors that your council or the previous council set in 2014. And finally, that you base fees on current cost and apply slightly higher cost recovery factors where they're reasonable, and that would be something like the assumptions in the budget. So I'm ready for your direction as to where you'd like to go. If we want to talk about this more, in general, if you want to talk amongst yourselves, or if you have some specific ideas that you'd like to bring back in one size or shape, I'd be happy to do my best to bring it to you.
Thank you very much, Dave. And just kind of as a reminder, I think part of the discussion to get us to where we are here tonight was a 7-figure deficit that we're trying to fill. And in discussions with staff on how do we fill those deficits, the conversation came up about 50% cost recovery. And then the formula that we use, which is a little vague, it's not a hard product like you can take a hard cost for a widget and say this is my cost. Our cost kind of fluctuates and things. And so when we look at cost recovery, that's why I wanted to explore the 100% recovery. And when we talk about being proactive, and working with our EDC and going out to find businesses, that we find that these fees are not the tipping point. These fees are not the deal breaker, so to speak. And it's not really additional funds. The way I see it is this is part of our cost. So cost recovery is exactly that. We're just recovering our costs. These are not additional funds in our pocket per se, our general fund, but trying to get closer to recovering our costs. So I think this is very complex. There's a lot of questions that I have, and I'm sure my colleagues do as well. I'm sure there's going to be variations or hybrids thereof, some of your recommendations. So we kind of hit the ground running, but I would want to preface that with I don't think this is something that is time sensitive, and if it's something we want to maybe gather some information and come back and kind of fine tune it as we go, that may have to happen. But I'm going to open up to my colleagues and their questions, and we'll go from there, starting with Councilman Oliver.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and certainly echoed some of my comments. But I'm prepared to go through line by line and have some recommendations. So, no, I'm joking. Certainly, I think it would have been helpful to have that baseline as to what we're charging today across the board. It gave me a little bit more frame of reference, so that's something I think we should definitely bring back. And I don't know that I'd be ready to provide formal direction as to going 100% cost recovery. I'd like to see what some of those deltas are. But I think and as the mayor alluded to, it was primary to our budget discussions, and as part of that, we talked about economic development and being competitive, which should also be central to our budget discussions. So I think for me, more important than the costs and each line item is whether or not any particular user that comes in or prospective applicant that comes through those doors, whether they can rely on some level of consistency and clarity in walking out. I had a good discussion with a entrepreneur who's going to be opening up a restaurant and bar and grill type facility here in Madera, and they are an individual who participated in our small business workshops. Used some of that information and resource and applied it to the development of their plans. And I asked him, how do we do? And he had alluded to that it was a bit overwhelming, especially for that entrepreneur. And I was hoping Chris Boyle was here tonight. I wanted to give him kudos and credit for guiding this applicant through the process and really spelling out what those costs may be. But he sensed some frustration as to just the unknowns. And I know that that's going to happen, especially if you're renovating a space and there's a certain level of tenant improvements. But so I think my question would be, and it's kind of open-ended beyond these costs, is how can we set up a framework, whether it be a development review committee that's available to any prospective business that's serious about locating here, so that they can come through those doors, they can meet with the respective departments and their staff members, and they can have more or less an idea as to what that project may cost. I know that we can't zero in 100% of the cost, but especially as they go to finance or get a construction loan or whatever it might be. So I think, to me, that's kind of one of the overarching questions that sits in my mind before we go and make adjustments to 100% or 90% of that cost recovery. We've got to get that customer service element done first, and we have to make sure that we have the resources to have staff readily available to answer some of those questions preliminarily, so that he's not having to come back, staff's not having to come back for multiple inspections or revised site plans. So I might just start with that kind of very open-ended question. Dave, I know you probably hear that from time to time too.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we do, we encourage, and I wish I had a percentage as to what our building and development community, how often they take us up on it. But one of the things we ask folks to do is to engage us in our free and preliminary project review process. So if somebody comes to the counter, and whether it's the tap house or a 1 million square foot industrial building, we always encourage folks to provide us with as much information as they can, whether it's the back of a napkin or a fully engineered set of drawings. Mm-hmm. And we will take that and without charge do what we call a preliminary project review, which results in an internal circulation to all of our departments, and we provide back a set of probable conditions of approval and kind of a fatal flaw analysis as to what kinds of issues are going to be faced, and in turn what kind of costs are going to be really the responsibility of a project to bear. Those are done at different levels based on what kind of project it is and how sophisticated the folks that are asking are.
Sure.
And I don't make any bones about it. Development is tough.
Oh yeah.
It is unexpectedly hard for people who have not gone through it before, and we try to provide as much information as we can to simplify it. But for the folks who are experts in other things, they're constantly surprised, shocked at the things that they didn't know that they didn't know. Sure. And we could bridge that to some extent, and we do. But what we have found is that there's no substitute for experience. And maybe I'm not selling our customer service as well as you'd like me to, but I think we do a really nice job of providing customer service. But it's still what I would tell folks is just be prepared for the unexpected, and don't development is not for the faint of heart, and we promise to do our part to help you along through the process, but don't come in with blinders on. It's a difficult process. So anyway, the preliminary project review is always encouraged and offered, and then we offer a project manager function. We have described to the council before, and certainly we make it available to the development community. Back when Chris was a one-man planning department, it was hard for him to do more than a project or two at any one time. But now that we have two planners on staff in addition to Chris, we're going back to more consistently having a single point of contact. So the same development project comes to the counter, and whether that's the tap room or the million-square-foot building, and they have somebody that takes them starting at planning and provides them that single point of contact all the way through occupancy. And trying to get them to understand that they can call the planner after they're through the planning process. Then sometimes they don't get it. They feel like, oh, I've got to call building, and is this the fire marshal, or what did Public Works say? And we're like, no, really, you can call Chris or Rob or the planner, and they will go find that out for you, or they'll find at least specifically who you have to call. So we do some nice things like that. Not to say that we're not always looking for ways to do more.
Sure. No, yeah, absolutely. And I think more so than just how knowledgeable the applicant is, it's how familiar is the architect or the engineer that's submitting plans, and how well do they know the city processes. Right. And I think that's more than half the battle. But I would certainly see. Do we, as far as a preliminary project review, do we have a designated time frame each week or biweekly where we could tell folks and prospective applicants that on Wednesday of next week, we have this review, and you're more than welcome to attend?
We don't. We no longer have set meetings. We used to set them weekly, and we just didn't have enough consistent work to gather people together. So we no longer have consistent meetings. What we tell folks is that we try to turn our PPRs around within a 2-week period. Sometimes a little faster, sometimes a little longer, depending on what the project looks like and how busy everybody is. And then if folks would like to come in and meet with us, and some do, some don't, we'll come in and talk to them specifically about their project. Most are comfortable with a set of written comments that they can look at tangibly, sure, and then go back to their team.
Yeah, and just as far as the feasibility, I agree. I think the cost of a site plan review or variance is probably not going to be the make or break as to whether or not you get a 50 or 80,000 square foot user into Madera. It'll probably be more of a conversation about impact fees. So I do see this discussion as a complement to another discussion about impact fees and being competitive. But I do think as far as feasibility for smaller projects, for mom and pops and existing businesses that are here, I think it's absolutely applicable. And I think what we should look at is a customized incentive program. I think we should be conscientious of our budget, and we should be looking at higher cost recovery. I think that would be a prudent thing to do, especially given the times that we're in. But I'd like to see a customized program that, one, first and foremost, it takes into consideration if you've been a business operator here in the community for some time. So if you're a store owner in downtown and you're deciding to open up a second shop or maybe a second business on Yosemite Avenue, we should take into consideration that you've been in business for 15 years. And maybe we can, reduce your site plan review or conditional use permit by 15%. So I think we should get creative in that regard as much as the law will allow us to. And because I do think that those are consequential elements. So on one end, we might be telling them to, improve the sidewalk, but on the other end, we're saying, but we're also committed to you because you've invested here, and we're willing to offset that amount by X percent. So I think that would be maybe a creative thing that we can look at to benefit mom and pops. We can maybe look at some pilot areas like downtown or like Tozer Avenue. My colleagues have talked about before, or look at what some of the gaps are, needs are in the community. So if we hear all the time, folks want to see more restaurants or whatever type of use. Well, if we see that need in a particular submarket of town, perhaps we can eliminate a CUP if you're going to put in the tap house or whatever it might be, knowing the customer demand or at least the interest. And I think there's examples to draw from in other communities that have done that to make it more attractive and more feasible. So I don't think we're going to have all the answers tonight. I think this is a complement to the initial discussion. I'm definitely not prepared to provide any direction as to 70% or 100% cost recovery, but I think we should continue to discuss this and study this and solicit private industry feedback where we can.
Very good points, Councilman Oliver. Very good points. Councilman Rigby.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate staff looking into this. I know that it was a while back when we were going through the budget exercises that this was kind of brought up. I kind of just want to, my sentiments are sort of agreeable with that of Councilmember Oliver's, in which I'm leaning towards, I think a higher recovery cost is what's going to be essential given the situation that we're in as a city. I don't see why we would begin to even look at lowering, if not staying where we're at. But it just feels like the way the wind's blowing, we're going to want to stay somewhere in a higher percentage of recovery. I too feel like that this is kind of a two-way street. As much as I want to talk about development fee recovery, I just think that it's one and the same with the impact fees, and they got to coexist. And I'm hoping that this is sort of what that exercise is. It's sort of leaning us into now going into impact fees, and I would encourage members of this council to kind of wrap their heads around sort of what we're doing now as a city and what we can do to enhance the opportunities that we're given. I couldn't agree more with what Councilmember Oliver said as far as I would love to see us as a council working with staff to create an incentive system that is not necessarily overly unique, but I think that has some customized aspects to it to where we are better serving our community. I mean, if we're talking about the revitalization of a downtown, if we're talking about bringing in better businesses to subzones that don't have them, I mean, I'm thinking of North D Street where, it used to be such a vital marketplace, and now we're having to say goodbye to the Nishimotos. And so then what are we doing to ensure that I don't want to say that we're protecting businesses because that sounds like we're playing favorites, but we do want to encourage business, I think more so than anything. And so I think by looking at the development fee recoveries that have been put in front of us, I do also value, I will say this about the prelim project review. I know that I personally had the opportunity to sit down with a local business owner here in Madera, has been here for 20 plus years, and isn't even a Madera person, is a Fresno person, but and is looking to upgrade their business by taking over an older building, and ADA come to mind immediately, and all these other. And when he came to me, I was like, "You got to be kidding me!" But this was his dream, and who am I to say bad dream? But I do appreciate, Dave, you sitting down even with Chris and walking him through that process, because you're absolutely right. Here's an expert in their field, But then when it comes to ADA, when it comes to electricity, when it comes to gutters, when it comes to no idea. And then I'm kind of looking at these fees. Man, there's a lot. You talk about it looks like my cell phone bill at the very bottom. You know, the fine print. That's why you're stuck with us for the rest of your life. And so maybe as we're going through this process, I don't know if this is an exercise that needs to be done. Can we maybe, confine what we're doing here so it's not as confusing or as overwhelming? If we're doing the exercise, I might just throw it out there that if this is something that we can do, I would be interested in being a part of that process. But I definitely am not ready as well to sort of give direction as to tonight where I want to go with this. I think I want to talk about it more. I want to wrap my head around it more. I'm excited to look at what sort of incentive programs we can offer to ensure that we are putting zones in our city that have some type of influence, that there is a sphere of influence in several of our districts, and specifically District 5. But, I think that these are all things that I want to talk about and include. And maybe through the prelim project, I don't know if I kind of wish Mr. Boyle was here, but is our ADA, because all of us have ADA representatives on a committee, is that committee actively a part of sort of this process? And if not, maybe we can include them in it. I don't know. But that's kind of, those are I'm just sort of getting everything out of my head.
Sure.
Since we're just sort of talking about it, and it probably sounded like a bunch of oatmeal mush. But
this is the
it
place
is 9
to do
o'clock
it.
at night.
This is the place to do it. No,
Just getting started.
points well taken, yeah.
Just getting started.
2 more hours to go. Councilman Rodriguez.
Thank you, Mayor Medellin. Obviously, we're having this conversation, David, because we have a 7-figure deficit, right? Obviously, this is an exercise that went through during the budget. But question for you, in 2014, what prompted the council at the time to allow for such a low cost recovery, especially in the planning? I know that maybe we're getting out of recession or what have you, but what prompted the council at the time to
Trying to stimulate.
get such a low cost of recovery?
The consultant that we work with, who is an expert in this kind of cost analysis, was very clear in that it's typical for cities to set cost recovery at less than 100% for any variety of reasons. It may be as simple as you're not wanting to push the envelope and be as exact as to say we want to try to get to 100% on the dot, and our calculations are perfect, so we're going to set it at 90 or 95 just to give a cushion of accuracy. But more generally, it's the you're trying to achieve some community benefit by lowering the barrier of permitting or eliminating a discouraging factor for people to apply for permits, particularly on the building side. But it's interesting that the lowest fee recovery percentage is almost always on the land use side in planning departments, and that may be. I know Steve might argue because of his familiarity with non-conforming building construction, but we see an awful lot of folks, even today with our fees, that are perfectly happy if not trained to ask forgiveness instead of permission. And that's one thing that setting a fee system at a reasonable rate is we can kind of eliminate that argument, or at least lessen the argument that gosh, I would have applied for your permit, but it was just too expensive, or you're more expensive than the next guy, and if you were more reasonable, then I don't think we ever are going to be in a position to eliminate those arguments, but that's sort of the bigger picture, greater good argument. There's certainly also the looking at fee recovery on a macro level. So whereas Steve in the building department, he recovers almost all of his total budget expenditures are equaled in fee revenue. So if you look at just just the building department's cost, and you look at just his revenues, they're right together. Sometimes sometimes revenues are a little higher, sometimes costs are a little higher, but they're pretty close. But if you look at the planning department, the overall fee recovery in the planning department is usually only a fairly small percentage of what their total expenditures are. So if you look at it at a macro level, you realize that you can recover 100% of the cost of processing a site plan review or a use permit, but you're still doing things at the counter, like those preliminary project reviews and giving people zoning information and attending meetings and doing community value things that aren't recoverable by fees. So we could very easily set permit recovery cost at 100% and still only capture somewhere between 50 and 70% of the department's total cost and fees. So there's a lot of different ways to look at that question, and I think all of those were probably part of the council's consideration in 2014.
So, you brought up a word there, discouraging, and could that potentially, hereby increasing that cost recovery, especially in that department, could that be discouraging to some developers or business owners that might want to consider, or just some type of development? And the reason why I say that is because I know that with that development impact, they kind of coincide with each other, and essentially that's something that will be brought before us. But do you see a potential for a discouragement? I mean, you said it's a nominal fee or a nominal increase. Could that potentially be the, no, this is not for me, or?
Yeah, I think where we hear that is at the low end of the spectrum, the mom and pop kind of site plan reviews where a minor change to a site sometimes will require a site plan review, or it used to be that alcohol sales, people got angry because they'd have to go through a CUP to get permission to sell alcohol in the city. That was done for a very specific reason, many years ago, where we had a huge problem with alcohol sales establishments, and so we fixed that in part by attaching it to a land use approval. But some of the smaller shops said, well, I don't want to pay the, whatever the cost was, $1,500 or $2,000 to go through that land use process before I even go to the state and then have to pay the state's process as well. It's very possible, and particularly at the lower end of the spectrum, that fees in general and a fee increase might be viewed as having a cooling effect on land use permitting.
But you say that's more in the lower spectrum, more like a mom and pop, not more of a commercial developer or anything like that.
I just view it as being very unlikely that even if it's a $5,000 site plan review on the largest structure, we're talking about architectural cost alone, architectural design cost, engineering costing, multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars for a large building to be designed and for civil improvement drawings to be prepared without any payment to the city. And if somebody's paying $500,000 for a stack of paper before it even gets submitted to the city, I'm just not sure that $5,000 in site plans, and if it's $12,000 or $15,000 in building permits, is going to have a material effect.
And to your point, it's really about education. I mean, on the lower end of the spectrum, it's not that other towns or cities have it so much cheaper. It's just more of an eye-opening experience, if you will, or educating the person at the side of the counter on just really what it takes. Mr. Tully and I have had a number of conversations years ago about the very same thing, and I'm sorry if you have more questions, Councilman Rodriguez, but it was trying to reach out to these either existing small businesses or somebody that wants to start a business on how can we reach out to them before they sign a lease on a building and before they get into something that's a little over their head. And so to walk into planning was certainly offered at no charge and to answer any of your questions and to educate prior to. And I will say our Small Business Academy, as well as our Citizens Academy and our Police Citizens Academy, has just been so eye-opening to people who take advantage of it that we now have people that say, yeah, I didn't know. And so we've had a few Small Business Academies. where somebody is going to open up that business here in town, and we're proud to say, and I too want to give Mr. Boyle kudos, because he not only gave him his card, he meant it and said, if there's any questions, please call me. And he did, I think, multiple times. And we reached out to them and tried our best to help with that process, to hold their hand and walk them through. Can we always be there to hold their hand? No. But we're doing everything we can proactively to try and help those businesses and answer questions. Bottom line is, if somebody says their business $20,000, it doesn't cost $20,000. It goes above and beyond that. And so I do want to also talk a little bit about customer service and just how important it is. Sometimes it's not what you say, but how you say it, and how we hold their hand and the information we give them. I tell my employees sometimes is we know how much certain things that we sell cost, but the consumer has no idea. And so we should never treat them that it's common knowledge. You should know that. And same thing here. Whatever they do, they're going to scrape up their life savings. They're going to put some money together, some savings, or get a loan, and put something together that they think is going to be a benefit not only to themselves but to the community. And then it's reality check. But I would really want them to know that we are on their side and we are here to help you in any way, not just for startup, but all the way through and to continue to be successful. So I have some other thoughts, but I apologize, Councilman Rodriguez. I'm not sure if you were finished yet or not.
I just had one other question, Member Dillon. And how often can we see a fee schedule like this come about? I mean, obviously the last one was in 2014, so are we doing this on basis on our budget? I mean, we see our budget next year, and possibly now we're in a higher deficit here. Are we going to revisit that again? And how are we communicating that to our business partners as far as, hey, this is what's happening now. Oh, guess what? This is what's happening this upcoming year. And so, not kind of like a water rate where we have these increments going up, but how often are we revisiting these fee schedules?
Right. I think ideally the model that Madera Unified uses with their development impact. I turn that off. With their development impact fee update is probably best business practice that I've seen locally, whereas annually, like clockwork, Madera Unified engages a consultant to prepare an update to their fee structure, and they circulate it in the same way. And there may be some discussion about the ultimate results of whether that fee changes or not, but they look at it critically yearly at the same time and inform the stakeholders, including our office, that that's going on. Probably the similar process for the City of Madera would be to do that as part of its budget process. And while we talk about it annually, as I mentioned, this would be the first time that an actual separate item has appeared on your agenda to talk about fee adjustments. So you can do it as often as you'd like. If you want to do it a couple of times a year, there's no limitation on doing so. But probably, I think what we had actually anticipated in 2014 was that there would be something like an annual COLA, cost of living adjustment that would be made each year right about the budget time. That just hasn't been done for a variety of reasons.
And that was going to, past practices, every 3 years, 2 years, and obviously this is more of an annual thing that we should be doing and looking at.
Yeah, the city has done it very infrequently, and so there isn't any specific pattern for fee increases or consideration of fee schedule updates.
Well, when the budget was good, obviously there was no need for it, correct? I mean,
I don't know about good, but
when we were able to cover.
Through the chair, council member, I don't remember good.
Yeah, remind me when that was. We did, if I remember correctly, we had those discussions, Councilman Rodriguez, about trying to stimulate the economy. Where certainly some of the big cities were out of the recession in 2014. Madera certainly wasn't, and we were stale with our economy, and so we were trying to do something to try to incentivize or do something to help with those. And at the time, we thought that 50% fee recovery or lower fee recoveries might certainly help. But again, we live and learn.
And to get into an organizational practice where that question comes up annually is probably the right thing to do. Whether or not an adjustment is approved or directed or not is a secondary question. So That's probably something that we should be doing more
Did you
rigorously.
see, David, any increase in people taking advantage of that low recovery cost? I mean, would you say businesses, developers, or any, what have you, took advantage of that? Did we see an increase?
Not that I would credit to.
Nothing that you can say it was major.
Yeah, there was no long lines or people rushing to the doors, if that's what you're asking.
Percent off?
Yeah,
No,
exactly.
what,
Yeah, clearance sale.
What tends to bump permitting activity and fee revenue accordingly is when staff has the time to be proactive to go get those folks who forgot to get their permits and to send them a letter saying, oh, by the way, you need to get a permit, and then they come in and they ask forgiveness. That's honestly when we see the permit numbers go up, is more proactive in enforcing it. Right now we're getting a lot of tire kickers, which is our, the loving name that we give to those folks who come in and talk about wanting to do something.
Yeah.
But that's been the case for a few months, so we believe that it's we're ripe for those to transition into permits and vertical development. But
that's great. Well, Dave, I think
Thank you, David.
I think there is a little bit of a theme tonight. I mean, obviously, we're not ready to give direction per se, but I think I want to recognize a couple of things. Is one, it sounds like the council is certainly wanting to pursue a higher cost recovery, if not 100% cost recovery. And if I speak out of turn, please let me know. But the other thing, and I want to let the record reflect that I've had conversations with two of my colleagues about the word incentive or how we approach incentive. And Councilman Oliver brought it up. He brought up some really good points, new and existing businesses versus startup businesses. And Councilman Rigby also brought up some very good points. I think I've heard Chris Boyle, myself, suggest areas that may work out better for what you want to do, and we kind of silver platter it. And there are some infill projects. There are some projects that are zoned for some of these startup businesses that have services already versus having to pay for services. So if we could recognize those particular zones of benefit or particular zones in the city of Madera that may benefit. I think years ago we had that discussion about that, and that you may qualify for if you have your startup business or expand your business into a particular area. And so I think we have kind of a flavor of not only fee structure, but when we talk about incentives, more of an economic development flavor and what we can do to assist and help businesses without necessarily giving away the farm, so to speak. So we touched a little bit on impact fees and reductions or discounts versus, and again, I think we can travel down that road. But I think this is all very positive discussion, and I think we're approaching this the right way. And I would not want to make any rash decisions or really put that pressure on you. But I think if we kind of have a series of discussions on what we think fits better, and it can very well be, Councilman Rodriguez, for a period of the rest of the year, and then kind of monitor to see where did that get us, and is that something we need to come back to the table and make any kind of amendments or things based on whether it stimulated the economy or not, or some of those factors. So that's kind of the way I see it. So there is maybe a little bit of direction there from the input you've heard from the council, and kind of go from there.
Mayor, if I may have a moment.
Of course, Mr. Chile.
I see the discussion the council is having as nothing but good for the city. And so I'm very supportive of the direction you're speaking to. However, there is some time sensitivity here. Your budget assumes that you're going to collect a higher rate for 75% of the year. You're 45 days into your budget. So if we don't reach a decision point in the next 45 days, then the $911,000 operating loss you have is going to grow. So from a time standpoint, I think we should move as efficiently towards your direction as possible.
I appreciate that word efficient, because this isn't anything to throw up against the wall and see what sticks, but at the same time, I can certainly appreciate our position. The longer we wait, then the less we can fill that hole. Completely understood. Any other questions or discussions regarding this particular item? Dave, thank you very much. Item E2 is request for direction on council participation in the Old Timers Day Parade.
Thank you, Mayor.
Horses. I'm going to ask you every year if we're going to be riding horses.
Does that mean that's a yes to participate?
How are we going to?
Individual horses, each one of us.
Great.
Yeah.
Unicorn for Charles.
Okay, briefly, there is a request before you on whether you'd like to participate in the Old Timers Day Parade. It's scheduled Saturday, September 23rd. Right now, you don't have to make any decisions on what a parade entry might be if you decide to, but we have used police vehicles, fire engines. We've had council members walk the route, hand out candy. So it's been a little bit of a variety of things there. And if you do decide to participate, we are required to execute a hold harmless agreement and submit that to the parade folks.
And it goes along with those horses as well.
Yeah, no, it's going to cost us a whole lot more. My feeling is I love when the community comes together for the parade. The Kiwanis Club does an absolutely fantastic job in running and sponsoring or co-sponsoring the parade. And when you can get an elected official front and center and mingle with people and wave and shake hands and pass out balloons and things, I think is absolutely awesome. And when you look at the cost, it's certainly really not a big expense. So I would certainly encourage participation in the Old Timers Day Parade.
Okay, very good. Now if it's a consensus amongst all, then I would request a minute order motion to approve executing the hold harmless agreement.
So move to approve.
Second. It's been moved and seconded to approve the minute order. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you, Sonia, for that.
Thank you.
Council reports. Councilman Robinson.
Yes, last Thursday I attended the San Joaquin League of Cities general membership, and we appointed new officers. And then on the 14th, I attended the oversight board meeting here. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem.
I'd like to give a shout out to the PD for putting on a really nice thank you luncheon to those who came out and support National Night Out and that were a part of it. The room was packed with all our city employees and some volunteers that had come out, so thank you so much for that. I also wanted to share that Madera Unified is doing a branding statement of We Believe, and it's that we believe that we will change the lives of children, our staff, and parents to do good things in Madera Unified and the city of Madera. We believe our students will strive in their education. We believe they'll become our new city leaders like we saw today with some of our athletes here. So not just hashtag Madera Proud, it's now We Believe as Madera Unified.
Thank you for that. Councilman Rigby.
Yeah, I'd just like to extend also a thank you to staff. As you know, we've been working in areas that aren't normally accustomed to city services, such as Parkwood, and I know that even at the LAFCO level, we're getting ready to possibly move into the Parksdale, and so I just appreciate staff's cooperation as you might be getting hit up by some members of LAFCO and your cooperation and being able to, show our county what we can offer as far as services and putting our best foot forward. I'd also like to mention that I'll be at Martin Luther King Middle School this Friday, passing out backpacks with the Madam President, First Lady, is she? First Lady, I guess. First Lady of Fresno State. President Castro's wife, and I'm assuming that Councilmember Hawley will be there as well, since he's reminded me several times, and so
He's going to do it again.
It's going to be a great morning.
Awesome. Councilman Hawley.
Nothing to report.
Councilman Rodriguez.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Medellin. I just want to report that Councilmember Will Oliver and I attended the symposium last Thursday. Great turnout. A lot of good ideas were exchanged as far as how we can improve our 2025 vision. Councilman Oliver did one of the things that he did suggest was to follow up and really put those thoughts and those suggestions to work and try to get our community in a better, well, not that it's in not a good state, it's a great state, but improve the quality of Madera by implementing some of the suggestions that were given with the group that was there. Other than that, that's all I have to report.
Thank you. Councilman Oliver.
Very well said, Councilman Rodriguez. And what was interesting in that exercise is to look at the priorities that were expressed by the community in 2005 and 2006, and to compare those to today based on the sampling of folks who participated. I thought it was quite eye-opening, and we thought it might be a good idea to bring it back to discuss some of those findings, and certainly we appreciate the Realtors Association's involvement on that. It was always intended to look for new partners to help be stewards of the Vision Project, and so I personally appreciate their ownership there. This week on Monday, I went to a CPUC meeting in Bakersfield. They are having public participation hearings on PG&E's economic development rate. It is set to expire later this year. It is a economic development attraction and retention tool, essentially for companies looking to locate here that have out-of-state options or looking to leave the state, or those who have fallen on tough times or looking to close their doors. Without it, they could benefit from a 30% cost reduction in their electricity costs over 5 years. In my day job, I've seen many of my client businesses utilize this incentive, and I've seen many center their decisions to stay in the valley based on it. So I went down there, and on behalf of Mayor Medell and the team here, and that's all I have to report.
Thank you very much for going and attending that. First of all, I would like to thank Mr. Block, who is still in our audience, who spoke during public comment. And with the definition of public comment, we are prohibited by law on acting on any particular item. But you obviously have an interest not only in your business but in downtown and in Madera, and you stuck around for over 3 hours to see how we do things here. So I want to give you my information before you leave so we can continue to speak. And homeless is a growing issue, not only in Madera but in the Central Valley, statewide and nationwide. But I will say that there's a number of partners and a number of people in Madera that are working diligently to help. CAPMC in Madera County, and it becomes an addiction issue. It can also become an issue of circumstance, and it goes on and on. And so not only my colleagues up here, but there's a number of people and programs that have dedicated themselves to addressing that. And having a partner and you and others that are willing to come down here and want to say, I want to be part of the solution and not just part of the problem. On behalf of the entire council, thank you so very much for coming down here and being part of the solution.
My wife also works for she's worked for CAPMC, so she is part of the point in time count.
You know exactly what I'm talking about. And Councilman Oliver and I have some other councilmen that also are involved in point in time count and doing what we can. So we will continue to do so. So thanks again for coming down. I'm not sure if this is appropriate or not, Mr. Richardson. You can tell me, but we've had discussions about budget shortfalls and where we fell. We had a consent item that we discussed about with our budget and so on and so forth. But we also had a discussion about our redevelopment agency, and I'm not sure if I can direct Mr. Tooley or find out where we go from here with redevelopment agency, if there is some sort of exit strategy in play in the attempt to close that budget gap as we had discussed in our budget meetings.
If the question is whether you can actually enter into a full-blown discussion about it, I would say no if you're just merely putting the bug in Mr. Tooley's ear to look into that and put something together for you. I mean, it's kind of part of the council reports is kind of a unilateral kind of thing. But
that's really kind of what my direction is. It's not necessarily for a discussion or open, but I think it's something sooner rather than later that we need to pursue. We have a lot on our plate. We have staff going crazy, and there's a lot going on, so I'm just being proactive with time. But it was something that I would like to put in the ear of our city manager.
If I may make just a briefest response, I would be happy at your direction to talk to your executive director, but I have no authority over the successor agency. That relationship is between your executive director and the council as a whole. So I'd be happy to engage in a discussion, but ultimately, an exit strategy, a timeline for actions needs to be between you and Mr. Taubert.
Understood. That's all I have, and with that, I will ask Mr. Richardson to make an announcement.
Yes, Mayor, the council will now adjourn to closed session in 3 items, the first being a conference with legal counsel and pending litigation pursuant to Government Code 54956.9, subdivision D1 in 2 matters, and that's as listed on the agenda. The second item being a conference with legal counsel and anticipated litigation, that's significant exposure to litigation pursuant to Government Code section 54956.9 D2, and that's in 1 matter. The last of the 3 items is a conference with real property negotiators pursuant to Government Code section 54956.8, and the parties and properties as listed on the agenda. soon as she gets us live. We're good? Okay. Yes, Mayor, the council adjourned to closed session in 3 items. The first being conference of legal counsel and pending litigation pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9, Subdivision D1. No reportable action was taken. The second was conference with legal counsel and anticipated litigation, significant exposure to litigation pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9, Subdivision D2. 1 case, no reportable action was taken. Last was conference with real property negotiators pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.8, and no reportable action was taken in that matter either.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. And with that, meeting adjourned.